Hi guys, and tonight we're climbing into the cold blue dark of the Andes, where the wind moves like a whisper over stone terraces. Llamas breathe little clouds into the night, and beneath your feet, hidden in the soil, sleeps one of the most powerful foods in human history. How did this lumpy little tuber, so plain it almost apologizes for existing, help build empires, feed armies, rescue villages, ruin harvests, and change the shape of civilization itself? Not bad for something that spends most of its life underground, doing absolutely no showing off. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is. Maybe it is midnight in Manila, dusk in Dublin, or some unreasonable hour in Toronto. Wherever you are, let the room soften around you. Now, dim the lights. You walk slowly into the highlands of South America, where the air is thin enough to make every breath feel carefully borrowed. The mountains rise in dark folds around you, their peaks pale with snow, their slopes patched with grasses, shrubs, and stony fields. It is not an easy place to grow anything. Frost comes quietly. Sunlight burns by day and vanishes fast by evening. The soil feels cold through the soles of your sandals, gritty with dust and tiny fragments of rock. Somewhere nearby, water trickles through an irrigation channel, making a small silver sound in the dark. This is where the potato story begins. Not in a royal kitchen, not on a dinner plate beside butter and salt, but in a harsh mountain world where survival depends on noticing small things. A leaf shape, a patch of soil that stays damp, a plant that withers above ground yet hides food below. Long before anyone writes about it, long before Europe even knows this crop exists, people living in the Andes learned to read the land with patient eyes. The wild ancestors of potatoes grow here in astonishing variety. Some are small, some knobbly, some purple, red, yellow, or almost black. Many are bitter. Some contain natural toxins that can make a careless meal deeply regrettable, which is history's gentle way of saying that early experimentation was probably not always fun. You crouch near a cluster of low plants, brushing aside dry stems. The leaves smell green and faintly sharp when crushed between your fingers. Under the soil, your hand finds a small tuber, cool, firm, and rough with clinging earth. The potato belongs to the nightshade family, the same broad botanical family as tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. That detail will later make some people nervous, because nightshades include plants with dangerous reputations. Even the potato plant itself produces little berries above ground that are not the parts you want for supper. A strange arrangement, really. The useful treasure hides below, while the plant casually decorates itself with misleading little fruits. Nature does enjoy a confusing user interface. In these high valleys, people gradually learn which tubers can be eaten, which need processing, and which are better left alone. This is not one dramatic discovery. No single heroic person points at a potato and announces civilization has been upgraded. More likely, it is a slow gathering of knowledge across generations. Children watch elders dig, families test, save, compare, and remember. A potato that survives frost becomes valuable. A potato that stores well becomes precious. A potato that fills the belly at high altitude becomes almost a quiet miracle. One mainstream historical fact sits firmly beneath this misty beginning. Potatoes were first domesticated in the Andean region of South America, especially around what is now Peru and Bolivia, thousands of years ago. The exact path from wild tuber to cultivated staple is harder to trace. Historians still argue whether domestication happened in one main region and spread outward, or whether different Andean communities shaped potato varieties in several places over time. The evidence lies scattered in plant genetics, archaeology, ancient farming landscapes, and the stubborn silence of soils that do not always preserve what we wish they would. You stand beside a family's planting ground as dawn begins to grey the eastern ridge. The field is not flat and easy. It is lifted into terraces, held by stone, shaped by hands that understand slopes and water. The atmosphere is quiet but busy. A digging tool strikes earth with a dull wooden thud. Someone laughs softly. Smoke rises from a nearby hearth and carries the smell of ash, damp wool, and something earthy cooking in a clay pot. The scent is simple, almost sleepy, yet it carries the promise of warmth. At this altitude, grain crops can struggle. Maize grows in many Andean zones, but not everywhere with equal ease. Potatoes, however, are wonderfully suited to cool mountain climates. They grow underground, protected from sudden weather in ways that more delicate crops are not. They can be planted in varied microclimates, tucked into valleys, slopes, and high plateaus. They are calorie-dense, which is a polite academic phrase meaning they help keep human beings from becoming dramatically hungry. And here is a quirky little detail from the potato's early world Andean farmers eventually cultivated thousands of potato varieties, each with its own colour, texture, taste, altitude preference, and purpose. Some were good for boiling, some for drying, some for ceremonial use. Some look so odd that, in a modern supermarket, they might be mistaken for decorative stones with personal problems. But in the Andes, diversity was not decoration, it was insurance. If frost ruined one variety, another might survive. If disease touched one field, another kind might resist. Variety was a living safety net. You feel that lesson in the cold air. The people here are not simply growing food, they are building resilience. Every tuber saved for seed is a tiny decision about the future. Every harvest is a conversation between hunger and hope. The potato becomes part of daily rhythm planting, earthing up, digging, sorting, cooking, drying, storing. The work is repetitive, yes, but not dull. Repetition is how fragile knowledge becomes culture. As the sun rises, light spills over the terraces. Frost glitters briefly on grass before melting. The mountains turn bronze, then gold. You hold a potato in your palm. It is not beautiful in the usual way. It has eyes, dents, scars, and a certain shy lumpiness. Yet inside it is starch, moisture, minerals, and possibility. It can become a meal, a seed, a tax, a ration, a trade good, a memory. It is humble, but never simple. In the quiet of this first landscape, you begin to understand why the potato matters. It is not powerful because it looks impressive. It is powerful because it waits underground, patient and practical, asking very little and giving back enough to keep people alive. The wind moves over the stones, the soil cools your fingertips. Somewhere, a pot bubbles gently in the morning hush, and the long history of the potato begins in the dark earth beneath you. You kneel in the pale morning beside a patch of broken earth, where the ground is cool, damp, and faintly fragrant with minerals. The Andes are awake now, but gently. Wind combs through tough grasses. A bird calls from somewhere beyond a ridge. Near your hands, the potato plants sit low and modest, their leaves dull green against the brown soil, their flowers small enough that a person in a hurry might miss them entirely. But nobody here is in a hurry, not in the way a modern clock demands. Time is measured in frost, rain, moonlight, hunger, storage, and the ache in your knees after planting. You watch early farmers work with quiet concentration, pressing seed tubers into the ground. Their fingers are cracked from cold. The soil catches under their nails. A woven pouch rests nearby, filled with carefully chosen potatoes from the last harvest. This is where farming becomes memory made practical. Domestication is not a single event. It is not one bright afternoon when a wild plant suddenly becomes a crop, smiling politely and agreeing to behave. It is a long relationship. People select plants. Plants respond through survival, and generations slowly reshape what grows around them. A farmer notices that one potato is less bitter, Another keeps longer in storage. Another survives a cruel frost. Another produces more beneath the same patch of ground. These observations matter. They are small, but small things, repeated for centuries, become world-changing. You walk beside a woman carrying a basket lined with soft fibre. She sorts the tubers by touch as much as sight. Some are smooth and round. Some are thin and twisted like sleeping roots. Some carry purple skins, others pale yellow flesh, others red blotches as if painted by a distracted mountain spirit. She does not need a written label. Her hands know them. Her mother's hands knew them. Probably her grandmother's hands knew them too. This is science without notebooks, careful and sharp, stored in speech, habit, taste, and ritual. A mainstream historical fact rests at the centre of this scene. Potatoes were domesticated by indigenous peoples of the Andes thousands of years ago through selective cultivation of wild Solanum species. These people did not merely find a convenient plant and eat it. They transformed a wild, often bitter, and chemically defended tuber into one of humanity's great staple foods. That achievement required patience on a scale that feels almost impossible from the rushed little balcony of the modern life. The wild potato was not always friendly. Many wild tubers contained glycoalkaloids, natural compounds that protect the plant from insects, animals, and disease. In small amounts, these compounds are manageable. In large amounts, they can taste intensely bitter and make people sick. So early Andean communities learned caution. They tasted carefully. They processed. They observed animals. They watched which tubers caused trouble and which filled the stomach without complaint. You can almost hear the quiet ancestral advice. Maybe do not eat the suspiciously bitter one, unless you enjoy turning dinner into a learning experience. Some communities also learned that clay could help. In parts of the Andes, people ate certain bitter potatoes with edible clay, which can bind some toxins and soften the harshness. This is one of those quirky tidbits that sounds invented by a bored storyteller, yet it belongs to real food practice in Andean life. Imagine sitting by a hearth, dipping a potato into a clay sauce, and thinking, yes, this is perfectly normal, because survival has always been more creative than elegance. The hearth smoke curls around you. It smells of dry dung fuel, herbs, and warm tubers. A clay pot rests near the coals. When someone lifts the lid, steam rises into the thin air, carrying a soft, earthy sweetness. A child reaches forward, then pulls back when an elder murmurs a warning. Hot food teaches patience faster than philosophy. The first farmers are not simply choosing potatoes that taste pleasant. They are working with altitude, frost, slope, rainfall, soil depth, pests, and storage. Each valley behaves differently. A field facing the morning sun warms faster. A hollow gathers cold at night. A slope drains water too quickly. A patch near a spring stays damp longer. You begin to see the landscape not as scenery, but as 1,000 tiny agricultural decisions. Historians still debate how many stages stood between gathering wild potatoes and fully managed cultivation. Some argue that early people may have encouraged useful wild stands before planting became systematic. Others suggest that cultivation and selection intensified as communities settled into more reliable farming patterns. The evidence is delicate because tubers decay easily. An ancient potato remains rarely preserved as clearly as stone tools or pottery. The potato, being modest to the point of inconvenience, leaves historians squinting at starch grains, plant DNA, and traces in ancient soil. You move through a small settlement where daily life is built around practical rhythms. Storage pits are checked, tools are repaired, children carry water in vessels that bump gently against their hips. The air has the dry bite of elevation, but the sun on your shoulders feels surprisingly strong. Nearby, someone spreads harvested tubers across a mat, sorting them into piles: food for now, food to preserve, seed for planting, and perhaps a few odd little specimens kept because they did something useful last season. That last pile may be the most important. It is the pile of attention. A potato does not grow true from botanical seed in the simple way some plants do. Farmers often plant tubers or pieces of tubers, meaning they can preserve a successful plant almost like a living copy. This makes the potato wonderfully dependable, but also a little risky. Too much sameness can invite disease. Andean farmers answered that risk with variety. With a whole library of living forms grown across different places and conditions, you touch a seed tuber, and its skin feels firm, almost waxy in the cool air. Its eyes are shallow marks now, but each one holds the promise of a sprout. There is something strangely intimate about it. Grain scatters like dry rain, but a potato feels like a small body, held whole in the palm. To plant it is to bury food in faith that more food will return. That is brave, when hunger has a voice. You hear digging sticks strike the soil again, a steady rhythm softened by wind. The sound is not dramatic, it is domestic, repetitive, almost sleepy. Yet beneath that rhythm is a revolution. People are learning to create calories from cold ground. They are learning that the mountains, as stern as it looks, can be persuaded into partnership. They are learning that survival can be stored underground. By late afternoon, the sky deepens to a hard, clear blue. Shadows stretch along the terraces. The scent of cooked potatoes lingers near the homes, mingled with smoke and wool and damp earth. You feel tired in the body, but calm in the mind. Around you, no empire has announced itself. No king has praised the crop. No foreign traveller has written a puzzled description. There are only farmers, families, soil, and patient selection. And somehow, that is enough, because civilization often begins quietly. Not with trumpets, not with marble, not with somebody making a very serious speech in a large hat, but with hands in the dirt, choosing the least bitter tuber, saving the strongest one, and trusting that the hidden world beneath the soil will answer. You stand where the mountain road bends along a steep ridge, and the world seems to fall away on both sides. The air is sharp and clean, carrying the smell of stone warmed by sun, dry grass, and distant smoke from cooking fires. Below you, terraces step down the slopes in patient green lines. Above you, snow lies on the higher peaks like a quiet warning. This is a place of beauty, yes, but also of calculation. Every path, wall, field, and storehouse has a purpose. The Inca world knows the potato well. You walk beside travellers moving along a stone road, their sandals scuffing softly against fitted rock. Llamas follow in a slow, dignified line, bells or small ornaments making faint sounds as they move. The animals carry bundles wrapped in woven cloth. Inside some of those bundles are potatoes in different forms, fresh tubers for near use, seed potatoes for planting, and dried potato products that can last for years if cared for properly. Here, food is not merely dinner, food is planning, food is politics. Food is survival in a mountain empire where valleys, deserts, plateaus, forests, and high passes all belong to one vast system of obligation and exchange. The Inca state, centered at Cusco, expands across a huge stretch of western South America, linking many peoples and climates. It builds roads, organizes labor, moves goods, and fills storehouses. And inside that careful machinery, the potato becomes one of the quiet engines. A mainstream historical fact belongs firmly here. The Inca used potatoes as a major staple crop, especially in highland regions, and they developed ways to preserve them, including freeze-drying them into chuño. Chuño is one of those brilliant inventions that sounds simple only after someone else has thought of it. You place bitter or hardy potatoes outside during freezing nights. You let the cold bite them. Then the strong highland sun dries them by day. People may tread on them to squeeze out moisture, skins, and bitterness. The result is light, durable, and storable. You bend to touch a pile of chuño spread on a mat. It feels dry, wrinkled, and almost chalky against your fingertips. It does not look glamorous. It will not be invited to pose for a royal portrait, but it can sit in storage for a long time, waiting through bad weather, failed harvests, military campaigns, and the ordinary uncertainty of being alive. A fresh potato feeds today. Chunyo speaks to next year. Nearby, a woman pours dried tubers into a large storage vessel. They make a soft rattling sound, like pebbles or bones, though the atmosphere is peaceful. Smoke from the hearth drifts around the doorway and carries the smell of stew, wool, and the faint sour tang of fermented drink. A child watches the sorting with sleepy seriousness, perhaps learning which pieces are good, which are damaged, and which will be set aside. In this world, children inherit not only stories, but storage habits. Very practical, not romantic perhaps, but romance becomes less important when the frost is rude. The Inca storehouses, known as kulkas, are placed with care. You see them on hillsides where air flows well, helping preserve maize, potatoes, textile, tools, and other goods. Their walls are sturdy. Their positions are intentional. They are part pantry, part treasury, part emergency system. If a region suffers shortage, stored food can be redistributed. If labourers work on roads, temples, terraces, or state projects, food can support them. If soldiers march, supplies can move with them or wait along the route. The smell inside a storehouse is cool and dry. You step into the shadow and feel the temperature fall against your skin. Dust floats in thin bars of light. Baskets, jars, and bundles sit in ordered spaces. Somewhere outside, wind presses against the wall and hums softly through cracks. The stillness feels almost ceremonial, as if food kept carefully enough becomes a kind of prayer. And yet the system is not just kindness wrapped in impressive stone. The Inca state organizes labor through forms of duty owed by communities, and food storage helps make that structure possible. People work fields, build roads, serve armies, weave cloth, and contribute to state needs. In return, at least in principle, the state supports festivals, armies, elites, and communities during hardship. It is a web of obligation, not a cozy mountain picnic. The potato sits in that web, ordinary and essential. Here is a quirky detail to tuck under your blanket in parts of the Andes. Potatoes were so embedded in life that varieties could be recognized by shape, color, taste, and even personality-like qualities in local memory. Some names described animals, body parts, tools, or visual oddities. You can imagine a farmer holding up a twisted tuber and saying, with complete seriousness, "This one looks like a puma's paw, or perhaps an old man's nose." Agriculture has always had room for poetry, and apparently for mild vegetable comedy. You continue along the terrace edge as clouds gather in the afternoon. The temperature shifts quickly, sunlight fades, and the air smells suddenly wet, metallic, expectant. Workers move through the fields with digging tools, checking plants, repairing walls, guiding water. Irrigation channels glimmer between stones. The touch of the wall under your palm is rough, cold, and steady. Everything here has been wrestled into usefulness without pretending the mountains are gentle. Scholars continue to debate how centralized Inca control over potato production truly was in every region. Some evidence suggests strong state organization in storage, labor, and redistribution, especially near administrative centers and roads. Other interpretations emphasize local community knowledge and older traditions that the Inca expanded upon rather than invented. The truth may vary across valleys, because empires are rarely as tidy on the ground as they look in diagrams. History, inconveniently, refuses to behave like a well-labelled cupboard. As evening comes, a meal is prepared. Potatoes simmer in a pot with herbs and perhaps other highland foods. Steam rises, warm and earthy, softening the cold. You sit near the fire and listen to low voices. Outside, llamas shift their weight. A baby murmurs. The wind circles the settlement and then moves on into the dark. You lift a piece of potato from the bowl. It is tender, plain, filling. It carries the taste of altitude, labour, frost, and storage. Around you, an empire stretches across roads and ridges, but the centre of the moment is small enough to hold in a spoon. The potato does not shout its importance. It waits in baskets, dries under the stars, fills storehouses, travels on llama backs, and steadies the lives of people who know how quickly weather can change. In the hush of the highlands, you understand its secret power. It is dependable in a world that is not. You stand on the edge of a high valley as unfamiliar men enter the Andean world with metal, horses, hunger, and confusion in their eyes. Their armour catches the sunlight in hard flashes. Their boots strike the ground differently from sandals. Their animals breathe heavily in the thin air, stamping at soil that has never had to make sense of hooves like these. The wind smells of dust, sweat, leather, and wood smoke. Something has shifted, and the mountains seem to notice. The potato's already old here. To the newcomers, it is strange. Spanish soldiers and chroniclers arrive in the 16th century carrying their own ideas about food, rank, farming, and civilization. They know wheat, olives, grapes, cattle, pigs, and the Christian calendar of feasts and fasts. They understand bread as something almost sacred in daily life. They value wine. They measure comfort in familiar grains and familiar animals. Then they encounter a lumpy underground crop eaten by indigenous communities across cold highlands, and many of them do not immediately recognize the significance beneath their feet. You walk near a temporary camp where Spanish men examine local provisions. Some are curious, some are dismissive, some are simply hungry enough to stop being philosophical. A soldier turns a potato in his hand, rubbing away dirt with his thumb. Its skin is dull, its shape uneven, its eyes faint and unsettling if you're already inclined to distrust unfamiliar vegetables. He sniffs it. The smell is earthy, not unpleasant, but not like wheat, not like anything that fits neatly into his world. To be fair, the potato does not make the best first impression when judged by people expecting bread. It grows underground. It arrives covered in soil. It has no golden crust, no noble stalk waving above the field, no graceful bunch like grapes. It is not trying to charm anybody. It looks like something the earth forgot to finish. A mainstream historical fact shapes this moment. Spaniards encountered potatoes during the conquest of the Inca Empire and the wider Andean region in the 16th century, and the crop gradually entered Spanish awareness through colonial contact. Early references appear in Spanish descriptions of indigenous foods and highland life. Yet recognition did not mean instant admiration. Europeans often treated New World crops through a filter of suspicion, usefulness, and comparison to foods they already knew. The conquest itself is violent, disruptive, and filled with misunderstanding. Indigenous communities suffer from warfare, forced labour, disease, political upheaval, and the collapse of older systems of authority. Fields still need tending, people still need feeding, storehouses still matter, but the meanings around food begin to change as colonial demands press into daily life. Tribute, mining labour, resettlement, church authority, and new markets all reshape the landscape. You step into a settlement where the sounds feel layered and tense. Indigenous farmers speak in low voices while Spanish overseers argue nearby. A dog barks. A metal tool clinks against stone. The smell of boiling potatoes rises from a pot, mingled with unfamiliar animal fat and the sour odour of tired bodies after travel. The atmosphere is not theatrical. It is heavy, practical, uneasy. For the Spanish, the potato becomes useful before it becomes beloved. In the highlands, it feeds people who work, travel, and endure. It can support mining centres where silver extraction demands enormous labour. It can be collected, traded, eaten by colonists, and carried as provision. But useful things are not always respected. History is full of things that keep people alive while being insulted by the very people benefiting from them. The potato, humble as ever, joins that club without complaint. A quirky tidbit from this age is that early Europeans sometimes confused potatoes with other underground foods, or described them through comparisons that now seem awkward. Chroniclers reached for familiar categories, calling them truffle-like, or likening them to roots. Even though potatoes are tubers from a plant family they did not fully understand. It is the old traveller's habit: meet something new, immediately force it into the shape of something old, then act confident. Very human, very wrong, but very human. You watch indigenous women prepare potatoes with practiced speed. They wash them in cold water that numbs the fingers. They scrape, boil, roast, or dry them according to the need of the day. The steam warms their faces. The cooked flesh breaks softly under pressure. For them, there is no mystery about whether the crop matters. It is food, seed, knowledge, and inheritance. The Spaniards may be uncertain, but uncertainty from outsiders does not make the potato any less real. Scholars still debate how quickly potatoes moved from being an observed Indian food to a crop actively transported and cultivated by Europeans. Some argue that Spanish ships carried tubers relatively early, because they were useful provisions and botanical curiosities. Others suggest that adoption was slow and uneven, filtered through ports, monasteries, gardens, and colonial networks rather than one clear route. The record is patchy, because nobody at the time stood beside a crate and politely wrote, "Here begins the global potato era." That would have been helpful. But history rarely hires good secretaries. In colonial towns, food becomes a meeting place of power and adaptation. Spanish settlers desire wheat bread, but wheat does not thrive everywhere, and supply is uneven. Indigenous crops remain essential: maize, quinoa, potatoes, beans, peppers, and other foods continue to sustain life even as European animals and plants spread. Kitchens begin to change. Fields begin to change. Bodies adapt to new diets while mourning old certainties. The potato also moves through systems of coercion. Labourers in mines and on estates need calories. Officials and landholders learn what local crops can provide. In the cold highlands, potatoes remain hard to replace. You can feel the uncomfortable truth in the air. The same crop that nourishes communities can also be folded into exploitative systems. Food is never innocent once power decides to count it. You pause near a roadside where a group of people carry sacks downhill. The fabric scratches their shoulders. The weight pulls at their backs. Inside the sacks, potatoes press against one another in the dark, each one small, silent, and full of stored energy. A mule snorts. Clouds slide across the sun. Dust sticks to damp skin. The Spanish conquest does not discover the potato in any meaningful moral sense. Indigenous peoples already know it deeply. What conquest does is expose the crop to a new, expanding network of ships, markets, empires, and appetites. The potato enters European records through eyes that often fail to understand the agricultural brilliance behind it. But the tuber does not require admiration to travel. It only requires movement. Evening settles over the valley, fires brighten. Somewhere a church bell rings, thin and strange against the mountains, somewhere else. An elder speaks softly to a child about planting, yes, storage, and which tubers must be kept safe. The old knowledge survives, bruised but breathing. You hold a potato still warm from ash. Its skin blackens your fingers. Inside, it is soft, pale, and comforting. Around it, empires collide, languages shift, and lives are broken open by conquest. Yet the taste remains earthy and calm, almost stubbornly ordinary. The potato has met the conquerors now, and although they do not fully understand it, they have carried its story into motion. You stand near the harbour as the Atlantic breathes against the wooden sides of ships. Ropes creak, gulls cry above the masts. Barrels roll across damp planks with hollow thuds, and the air smells of salt, tar, fish, wet wool, and the sour closeness of long travel. Somewhere among the bundles, seeds, metals, hides, dried goods, and strange botanical specimens moving through imperial ports, potatoes begin their uncertain journey toward Europe. They do not arrive with trumpets. The potato crosses the ocean quietly. Tucked into the messy traffic of empire, ships carry silver, letters, soldiers, priests, enslaved people, animals, tools, and plants from one world to another. Some cargo is recorded carefully, some is barely noted. A few tubers in a sack may not seem important beside treasure fleets and royal orders, yet those small tubers have a hidden advantage. They can sleep for a while. They can wait in dark storage. They can be planted from pieces of themselves. They do not demand elegance, which is lucky, because 16th century sea travel is not exactly a luxury spa. You imagine a sailor handling them below deck. The space is cramped and dim. Water drips somewhere. Wood groans around you as the ship lifts and falls. The potatoes smell faintly of earth, a strange scent so far from soil. They sit among provisions, possibly alongside maize, beans, or other New World plants. Some may rot in dampness. Some may sprout pale shoots in the darkness, reaching blindly for light. A few survive long enough to be noticed. Spain is likely one of the first European places where potatoes take root, especially because of its colonial connection to the Andes, but early adoption is slow. The potato enters a Europe that is not waiting eagerly at the table with butter and a fork. It enters a Europe with strong food traditions, deep social hierarchies, religious meanings around bread and wine, and a general habit of looking at unfamiliar plants as if they might be plotting something. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Potatoes reached Europe in the second half of the 16th century, most likely through Spanish routes from the Americas, and they were first grown in gardens, hospitals, monasteries, and experimental plots before becoming a common field crop. Their early European life was scattered and uneven. They were not instantly embraced as a staple. In many places, they were curiosities. You walk through a walled garden in Spain, or perhaps the Low Countries, where a gardener tends beds of unusual plants collected through overseas expansion. The soil is darker and milder than the Andean slopes. Rain hangs in the air. Leaves shine with moisture. The potato plant grows low, its flowers delicate, perhaps pale violet or white. The gardener may admire the flower before valuing the tuber. This is very European of him, honestly. A plant arrives with the potential to feed millions, and someone says, yes, but does it look nice in the garden? In herbals and botanical collections, potatoes are examined and classified with uncertainty. Learned men compare them with known plants. Physicians wonder about their qualities hot or cold, dry or moist, nourishing or dangerous, suitable for the sick or better for animals. European medicine still carries older theories of bodily humours, so food is not simply food. It is moral, physical, and sometimes suspiciously dramatic. The potatoes family connection to nightshades does not help its reputation. Its leaves and berries can be toxic, and people unfamiliar with the crop may not immediately understand which part is safe. You can picture the problem. A plant produces visible berries above the ground, while the edible part hides underneath like a shy little secret. Anyone eating the wrong part would have a terrible evening and then warn the neighbours. Thus begins many a food prejudice. A quirky tidbit from the potato's early European travels is that it was sometimes treated as an exotic ornamental plant. Its flowers appeared in gardens before its tubers appeared regularly in bowls. In some elite circles, novelty mattered. The potato could be admired as a botanical oddity from distant lands, a living sign of empire's reach. Very charming, very rare, very nice near the wall. Meanwhile, the tuber sat below the surface, quietly thinking. I could feed your peasants, but do take your time. You hear rain tapping on leaves. The garden smells of wet soil, rosemary, and manure. Your fingertips brush the potato foliage, slightly rough, cool from mist. In the distance, church bells mark the hour. Inside a nearby building, a scholar may be writing a description that confuses names, origins, or uses. The potato is still learning how to be understood in Europe, and Europe is proving to be a slow student. Historians still argue about the exact routes and timing by which potatoes spread from Spain into Ireland, England, Italy, Germany, and other regions. Some evidence points to movement through Spanish territories and botanical networks. Other stories give special roles to sailors, privateers, monks, or local experimenters. A few popular tales are probably more legend than fact, because famous men tend to attract credit the way damp bread attracts mould. The real spread was likely gradual, carried by many hands, many gardens, and many small decisions. The potato's early reputation differs from place to place. In some regions, it is food for the poor, animals, or the desperate. In others, it is medicinal. In still others, it is simply ignored because people prefer grains. European farmers face practical questions. Does it grow well here? Does it store? Does it sell? Will landlords accept it? Will priests approve? Will neighbours laugh? Never underestimate the power of neighbours laughing. Entire agricultural revolutions have had to wait for somebody brave enough to plant the weird thing first. You walk into a monastery courtyard where a small potato bed lies behind a low wall. The monks keep records, tend herbs, care for the sick, and experiment with useful plants. A cook lifts boiled tubers from a pot. Steam clouds the cool air. The smell is mild, earthy, and comforting, though perhaps still unfamiliar. A brother tastes one cautiously. It is not bread. It is not porridge. It is not exactly a root. But it fills the mouth softly and settles warmly in the stomach. That quality matters. The potato can grow where grain harvests are unreliable. It produces a high yield from a small plot. It stores calories underground until harvest. But for now, these advantages are not fully appreciated. The crop moves slowly through Europe's imagination, part medicine, part curiosity, part suspicion, part animal feed. It waits for hunger, policy, fashion, and necessity to make people look again. At the harbour, another ship unloads under grey light. Men shout. Barrels scrape. Rain runs down the side of a crate. Somewhere in the cargo, a few potatoes arrive with soil still clinging in their creases. They are plain, quiet, easy to overlook, yet they carry the memory of mountains into damp European air. You pick one up. It feels cool and heavy in your palm, as if it contains more future than its size should allow. Around you, Europe continues with its bread ovens, grain markets, garden walls, and old suspicions. The potato does not rush. It has crossed an ocean. It has entered the waiting rooms of history, and for now, that is enough. You walk into a European village at the edge of a damp field, where the soil clings heavily to boots and the sky hangs low like a grey wool blanket. Smoke slips from thatched roofs. Chickens scratch near doorways. Somewhere a cartwheel groans through mud, and the smell of manure, wet straw, rye bread, and boiled cabbage rests in the air with complete confidence. This is a world that knows hunger well, but it also knows habit. Habit is stubborn. Habit can look at a useful new crop and say, absolutely not. The potato sits in a basket near a cottage door, and nobody seems entirely pleased about it. People gather around it with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion. A child pokes one tuber with a stick. An old man spits into the mud and mutters something about unhealthy food. A woman folds her arms and studies the crop as if it has arrived late and failed to explain itself. The potato has crossed seas, gardens, and learned discussions, but village acceptance is a different trial. Scholars may debate plants in Latin. Peasants want to know whether dinner will keep them alive, whether the priest approves, whether the harvest will be worth the labour, and whether the neighbours will make jokes. The answer to that last question is usually yes. Across parts of Europe, the potato faces a strange list of accusations. Some people fear it causes illness. Some connect it to leprosy because its rough skin and irregular surface remind them of diseased flesh. Others distrust it because it is not mentioned in the Bible, which is a difficult standard for a South American tuber to meet. Some worry that it grows underground, away from sunlight, as if the crop is morally suspicious for preferring privacy. The poor potato is not just food now, it is a social problem with eyes. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this muddy lane in many regions of early modern Europe. The potato was initially resisted or adopted slowly because people were unfamiliar with it, uncertain how to cook it, and wary of its botanical relationship to poisonous nightshade plants. Its acceptance depended on local conditions, famine pressure, state encouragement, and practical demonstration. In other words, the potato did not simply become popular because it was useful. People had to be persuaded, pressured, or hungry enough to reconsider. You enter a cottage where the fire burns low. The interior is dim, warm, and close. Smoke darkens the beams. Dried herbs hang from rafters. The floor is packed earth, slightly damp underfoot. A pot simmers over the hearth, giving off the familiar smell of grain gruel. On the table, a few potatoes wait in a wooden bowl. Their skins are dull brown, still marked with dirt. They do not look noble beside bread. Bread has ceremony. Bread has aroma, crust, and blessing. Potatoes look like something pulled from beneath a fence post. Yet bread depends on grain, and grain depends on fields that can fail. Wheat and rye harvests are vulnerable to weather, war, taxes, disease, and poor soil. In many parts of Europe, a bad grain year means hunger tightening its belt around every home. The potato's advantage is hidden in its humility. It can produce abundant food from relatively small plots. It grows underground, where passing armies may not immediately destroy it. It can feed families even when grain prices climb out of reach, but knowing that requires experience. Suspicion is often faster than experience. A quirky tidbit from these suspicious years is that some Europeans believed potatoes encouraged laziness or lust. The reasoning was not always clear, which is polite because sometimes there was not much reasoning to find. Foods were often judged by appearance, origin, supposed bodily effects, and moral imagination. A tuber that multiplied underground in secret could become, in worried minds, a symbol of uncontrolled appetite. Humanity has always been impressively talented at blaming vegetables for its own anxieties. You sit near the hearth as someone drops potatoes into the pot for the first time. The water darkens slightly. Steam rises. The smell is earthy, mild, and different from grain porridge. A spoon knocks against the pot's side. The family waits. This little act is not dramatic, but it carries risk. Food customs are intimate. To eat something new is to let the outside world enter the body. No wonder people hesitate. Local authorities sometimes try to overcome that hesitation. Landowners, rulers, physicians, and agricultural reformers gradually promote potato cultivation. They praise its yield. They distribute seed tubers. They publish instructions. They encourage poor households to plant it. Occasionally, they do this with patience. Occasionally, with the charming tact of officials everywhere, they become bossy. But command alone rarely changes a dinner table. People trust neighbours, harvests, and their own stomachs more than pamphlets. Historians still debate how much early resistance was based on genuine, widespread popular fear, and how much was exaggerated later by promoters who wanted to make themselves look heroic. Some stories about villagers rejecting potatoes may be true in spirit, but polished into legend. Others may reflect real local caution, especially where botanical knowledge was limited. The uncertainty matters because history loves a neat tale of ignorance defeated by progress. But village life was usually more practical than foolish. People were not stupid. They were careful, and sometimes care looked like refusal. Outside, the rain begins. It taps on the thatch and beads on cabbage leaves. The village road softens into mud. You hear pigs shifting in a pen, a baby crying, a woman humming under her breath while she mends cloth. The atmosphere is ordinary, and that is the point. The potato must enter not only European soil, but European routines. It must become normal enough to stop being discussed. That takes time. A farmer experiments with a small patch near the edge of his field, not wasting prime grain land on the odd crop just yet. He presses seed pieces into the earth and watches. Leaves emerge. Flowers appear. Beneath the soil, tubers swell unseen. This hidden growth troubles some people, but it also protects the harvest. When the plant is pulled and the potatoes tumble out, cool and solid, the mood changes. A basket fills quickly, then another. Hunger does not vanish, but it listens. You hold a freshly dug potato against your cheek. It is cold and slightly damp, smelling of soil and roots. It is not frightening in the hand. It is merely food awaiting trust. By evening, the first boiled potatoes are ready. Someone breaks one open. Steam curls upward. Salt, if available, sharpens the taste. Butter, if the household is lucky, makes it rich. Without either, it is still filling. A child eats first because children are often braver when hungry. The adults watch closely. No disaster follows. The roof does not collapse. The village does not burst into scandal. One small victory for common sense, though common sense has arrived wearing muddy shoes and looking embarrassed. The potato's path into ordinary life is slow because civilization is not changed by usefulness alone. It is changed when usefulness becomes trusted. In this village of smoke, mud, doubt, and cautious appetite, the potato begins that quiet work. Not as a miracle, not as a fashionable curiosity, just as something warm in the bowl, something that fills the stomach, something that might be planted again. You enter a formal garden where gravel paths crunch softly beneath polished shoes, and the air smells of clipped hedges, damp soil, perfume, and horse leather drifting from carriages beyond the gate. The potato has come into a different kind of theatre now. Not the smoky cottage, not the harsh mountain field, not the crowded harbour, but the world of rulers, courtiers, physicians, and fashionable people who can turn even a vegetable into an announcement. The plant grows in a neat bed near medicinal herbs and exotic specimens. Its leaves are green and slightly rough, its flowers pale, delicate, and surprisingly pretty. A courtier leans close, admiring them as if they are rare jewels. Someone murmurs approval. Someone else asks whether the tubers are safe to eat. A gardener says yes, probably. That word does a lot of work. In royal and elite circles, the potato gains attention not only because it can feed people, but because influential figures begin to frame it as useful, patriotic, scientific, and even stylish. This is one of history's little jokes. A crop may be ignored by ordinary people for decades, but once a queen wears its blossom or a king praises its value, suddenly everyone acts as though they discovered common sense personally. A mainstream historical fact belongs here in 18th century Europe. Rulers and agricultural reformers promoted potato cultivation as a way to improve food security, especially in countries such as France, Prussia, and parts of the Habsburg lands. Frederick the Great of Prussia encouraged potato planting among his subjects, while in France, Antoine-Augustin Parmentier became famous for advocating the potato after recognizing its nutritional value. Their efforts helped move the potato from suspicion toward broader acceptance. You follow the scent of candle wax and roasted meat into a dining room where conversation rises gently beneath painted ceilings. Silverware glints. Linen lies smooth beneath bowls, sauces, and breads. At one end of the table, potatoes appear prepared in a refined style, perhaps mashed, baked, or served with butter. The guests taste them carefully. because nobody wants to be the first to look uncultured in front of a noble host. One person nods, another nods a little more confidently. Soon the humble tuber is moving through elite society wearing borrowed manners. Parmentier's story is especially vivid. He had spent time as a prisoner during the 7 Years' War and ate potatoes while held in Prussia. Instead of deciding that prison food should be avoided forever, which would be understandable, he became convinced that the potato could help feed France. He promoted it through scientific argument, public demonstrations, dinners, and clever publicity. He understood that food acceptance is emotional as well as practical. People do not simply eat nutrients, they eat reputation. You step into a Parisian garden where potato flowers brighten in the afternoon light. Their petals are modest but graceful, white or lavender against green leaves. The soil is soft from recent rain. Bees move lazily between blossoms, making a low, sleepy hum. The atmosphere is calm, almost elegant. It is difficult to believe that beneath these flowers lies a food once treated as suspicious, coarse, or fit mainly for animals. One famous tradition says that Parmentier arranged for guards to watch over potato fields by day, making villagers think the crop was valuable, then left the fields unguarded at night so people would steal the tubers and plant them. It is a delightful story, almost too delightful, which is when historians begin clearing their throats. Whether every detail is true or polished by later retelling, the tale captures something real about persuasion. People often desire what authority appears to protect. Nothing says delicious like mild forbiddenness and a sleeping guard. A quirky tidbit from the elite potato age is that potato blossoms were reportedly worn as fashionable accessories. Marie Antoinette is often linked to wearing potato flowers, and whether the story is exact in every detail or embroidered by memory, it reflects the crop's unusual movement into symbolic display. Imagine a vegetable so unfashionable that peasants hesitate to eat it, then so fashionable that aristocrats place its flowers near silk and pearls. The potato, one suspects, remained emotionally unchanged by this promotion. Still, fashion alone cannot feed a continent. Agricultural reformers publish instructions on planting, storing, and cooking. They compare yields. They argue that potatoes can support families when grain is scarce. They urge farmers to use marginal land more efficiently. They speak to landlords, local officials, and village priests. Sometimes the message arrives gently, through example. Sometimes it arrives as policy. In Prussia, state encouragement could feel firm, even stern. The potato became part of the language of disciplined agriculture and military strength. You walk through a Prussian village where officials inspect fields. The morning is cold, breath fogs in the air. A farmer stands beside a plot of potato plants, his hands rough and red from work. The leaves rustle in a light wind. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts, and a child coughs behind a cottage door. The official speaks about duty, yield, and proper cultivation. The farmer listens with the expression of someone calculating whether the crop is worth the trouble, and whether arguing will improve his morning. It probably will not. In this atmosphere, the potato becomes tied to state power. Rulers want stable populations, fed soldiers, productive taxpayers, and fewer bread riots. The potato offers calories that do not depend entirely on grain markets. It can grow in poor soils. It can be cultivated by households. It can survive where other crops struggle. But it also requires knowledge how to plant, hill soil around stems, store tubers in cool darkness, and avoid green or spoiled potatoes. Historians continue to question how decisive famous promoters really were. Did royal orders and elite campaigns cause the potato's rise? Or did population pressure, famine, war, and practical farmer experimentation matter more? The answer likely lies in their combination. A king can command a crop, but hunger makes the argument persuasive. A scientist can praise a tuber, but a mother watching a pot fill with food understands its value without Latin names or courtly speeches. You pause near a public demonstration where potatoes are being cooked outdoors. The fire snaps softly. Butter melts in a pan. Steam rises with a warm, earthy smell that mingles with wood smoke and cold air. People gather at a cautious distance, pretending not to be interested while clearly being extremely interested. This is another timeless human behaviour: public indifference to free food. Someone tastes, someone asks for another piece. A murmur moves through the crowd. The potato is crossing another invisible boundary, from experiment to appetite. At court, flowers and banquets give it polish. In fields, rulers and reformers give it pressure. In kitchens, cooks give it familiarity. The potato's transformation depends on all three. It must look respectable enough for the powerful, productive enough for farmers, and comforting enough for families. Slowly, it becomes less foreign. Its oddness fades. Its usefulness remains. By evening, the garden has cooled. Dew gathers on the leaves. The potato flowers close into the dimness, quiet after all the attention. Beyond the hedges, carriages leave, wheels whispering over gravel. In cottages farther away, tubers simmer in iron pots. In government offices, plans are made. In farmyards, seed potatoes are stored for another season. You bend near the plant and touch the soil. It is damp, dark, and calm. Above ground, society performs its rituals of rank and persuasion. Below ground, the tubers swell without caring who wears lace, who signs decrees, or who claims credit. The potato has entered politics and fashion, but its deepest power remains stubbornly simple. It grows, it fills, it waits, and it feeds. You step into a small cottage at the edge of a crowded European village, where the roof sags gently under old thatch, and the floor is packed hard by years of feet. The evening is damp. Rain taps softly at the shutters. A fire glows low on the hearth, and the smell of smoke, boiled potatoes, wet wool, and sleeping animals folds itself into the room. It is not elegant. It is not spacious. But it is warm, and warmth matters. A family gathers around a wooden bowl. The potatoes inside are steaming, their skins split, their pale centres soft and heavy. There is no feast here, no silver plate, no fashionable flower tucked into anyone's hair. There is only food enough to quiet the stomach before sleep. A child reaches in with careful fingers, blowing on a hot piece. An older woman sprinkles a little salt, if the household has any to spare. Butter would be welcome, of course. Butter is always welcome, but the potato does not demand luxury. That is one of its talents. In many parts of Europe, the potato becomes most important not when elites praise it, but when ordinary families rely on it. The crop gives more calories from a small plot than many grain systems can provide under difficult conditions. A poor household with a little garden ground can grow enough potatoes to make the difference between hunger and endurance. It is not perfect. It is not a magic spell, but it is dependable in ways that change daily life. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this quiet room, as potatoes spread through Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. They help support population growth by providing a productive, calorie-rich food source, especially for rural poor communities, where land was scarce and grain harvests uncertain. Potatoes could feed more people per acre. This mattered enormously in an age when many families lived close to the edge of hunger. You walk outside into the garden plot behind the cottage. The rain has softened to mist. The soil is dark, loose, and cool beneath your hand. Potato plants grow in rows, their leaves sagging under droplets. Beyond the garden, grain fields stretch toward the horizon, but they belong partly to landlords, taxes, rents, and markets. The cottage plot is more intimate. It is a household's little defence against the wider world. The potato changes the meaning of small land. A patch that might not produce enough grain to sustain a family can produce tubers in useful quantity. Potatoes also grow underground, which gives them a quiet advantage during unsettled times. If soldiers pass through and cut grain or seize visible crops, tubers may remain hidden until dug. Not always. naturally. Soldiers are not famous for respecting gardens. But the potato offers a kind of concealment that tall grain cannot. You hear the muffled sounds of village life settling into night. A gate creaks. A cow shifts in a stall. Someone coughs behind a wall. The air has the wet, earthy smell that comes when fields have been drinking rain all day. Your fingertips brush the leaves, and they feel cool, slightly rough, alive, beneath them, unseen. Food thickens in darkness. Here is a quirky tidbit from the potato's rise among the poor in some regions. People developed extremely local habits for cooking and naming potato dishes, turning the same basic tuber into dumplings, pancakes, cakes, soups, mash, and breads mixed with grain. A visitor might travel a few valleys and find that everyone claims their version is the proper one, while the next village is clearly doing it wrong. The potato became humble food, yes, but also a source of culinary pride. Nothing brings out local patriotism quite like arguing over starch. The crop also changes labour patterns. Planting and harvesting potatoes require intense seasonal work, but they can fit into household routines. Women, children, and older family members often take part in sorting, storing, peeling, and cooking. The potato enters the rhythm of domestic life. It is planted in spring, watched through summer, dug in autumn, stored through winter, and eaten so regularly that its presence becomes almost invisible. That invisibility is part of its power. When a food is new, people discuss it. When it becomes essential, people complain only when it is missing. In a peasant household, potatoes may be eaten morning and night, boiled, roasted in ash, mashed with cabbage, stirred into soup, fried in fat when possible, or stretched with milk. They become the soft foundation of survival. They fill children's bellies. They help labourers return to fields. They reduce dependence on purchased grain. They allow families to raise pigs on scraps and small potatoes, turning tubers into meat, manure, and a little household wealth. The potato is not simply food in a bowl. It becomes part of a small rural economy. Scholars still argue about exactly how much the potato contributed to Europe's population increase compared with other factors such as improved sanitation, changing marriage patterns, reduced warfare in some regions, expanding markets, and better transport. Some studies give the potato a major role in raising calories and supporting growth. Others caution that its influence varied sharply by region and social class. The safest truth is also the most human one, where potatoes fit local conditions. They could make a hard life less fragile. You return to the cottage as the family meal continues. Steam clouds the low room. The wooden spoon knocks against the bowl. The children grow quiet as they eat. The adults speak softly about rent, weather, seed, and whether the stored potatoes will last until spring. The atmosphere is tender but tense, because full bowls tonight do not erase every worry. A crop can protect a household and still leave it vulnerable to disease, landlord demands, and bad seasons. History rarely hands out blessings without a little paperwork attached. The potato's success among the poor also changes how elites view the poor. Some landowners praise it because it keeps workers fed cheaply. Some reformers celebrate it as a tool of improvement. Some moralists worry that if people can survive on small plots, they may become too independent. Imagine being suspicious of a vegetable because it gives poor people options. Yet that, too, is part of the potato's social history. Food is power when land and hunger are unequal. In the hearth glow, you see why the crop spreads despite old fears. It asks for labour, but not admiration. It does not need a mill before it becomes edible. It does not require an oven built for bread. A pot, water, fire, and patience are enough. Its softness suits the very young and the very old. Its bulk satisfies bodies worn down by field work. It is plain, yes, but plainness can be merciful. Outside, mist thickens round the garden. The potato plants stand dark and low, their work hidden. Inside, the last pieces are taken from the bowl. Someone covers the remaining tubers with cloth. Someone banks the fire for the night. The room settles into breathing, warmth, and shadow. And you understand, in this stillness, how civilization can change without looking dramatic. A crop enters the cottage. Children survive lean months. Families grow larger. Labour continues. Villages expand. Markets shift. Armies find more bodies to recruit. Cities gain more mouths to feed and more hands to work. All from a plant that waits under soil, quiet as a secret. The potato does not end poverty. It does not make injustice gentle. But it gives millions of people one more way to stay alive. And sometimes staying alive is the beginning of every other kind of history. You walk beside a military road at dawn, where mist lies low over the fields, and the sound of marching feet comes slowly through the grey. Boots strike mud, wheels grind against ruts, horses snort clouds into the cold morning. Somewhere ahead, a drum taps with steady insistence, as if war itself has learned to keep time. The air smells of wet leather, wood smoke, iron, sweat, and the sour anxiety of men who have not eaten enough. A soldier's stomach is a historical document, though rarely a dignified one. Armies move on food. They may speak of glory, crowns, borders, and honour. But behind every banner is a cart full of bread, grain, dried meat, beer, oats, beans, or whatever can be seized from the nearest terrified village. Without supplies, armies slow, scatter, steal, badly, or collapse. The potato enters this world not as decoration, not as philosophy, but as calories. It is heavy to carry when fresh, yes, or easy to grow near camps, forts, villages, and military roads. It can feed peasants who feed armies. It can support states that need soldiers. It can survive in places where grain struggles. You pause near a roadside encampment. Men crouch by small fires, warming their hands. A pot hangs over one flame, and inside, potatoes bump against one another in cloudy water. The smell rises gently, earthy and plain, mixing with smoke and damp wool. Someone has added onions, perhaps a strip of bacon, perhaps nothing at all but salt and hope. A soldier leans close, watching steam bead on his unshaven face. He's not thinking about agriculture. He's thinking about the warmth in that pot. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this cold roadside scene by the 18th and 19th centuries. Potatoes had become important in parts of Europe for feeding both civilian populations and military societies, especially in regions where states promoted them to stabilize food supplies. Prussia is a famous example because its rulers encouraged potato cultivation partly to strengthen rural resilience and support a population that could be taxed, organised, and recruited. Potatoes did not win wars by themselves. That would be a rather smug claim for a tuber, but they helped sustain the societies that fought them. You move through a village recently passed by soldiers. The fields are trampled, a fence is broken. Chickens have become unwilling participants in military logistics. Grain stores may be emptied quickly because sacks of rye or wheat are visible, portable, and valuable. But beneath a nearby plot, potatoes remain hidden until someone digs. That hiddenness matters. During conflict, underground food can be harder to destroy or steal at a glance. Not impossible, of course. Hungry soldiers are imaginative, but a buried crop gives households at least a chance. The touch of the soil is cold as you kneel and scrape it aside. A tuber emerges, damp and brown, a small private reserve in a public disaster. You understand why peasants might plant more of such a crop in violent times. When armies pass, survival depends not only on what you have, but on what others fail to notice. War also spreads crops. Soldiers march across borders. Prisoners learn unfamiliar foods. Camp followers cook what can be found. Officials observe what feeds enemy populations and sometimes carry the idea home. People rarely adopt new habits because everything is peaceful and calm. Quite often, they adopt them because chaos has made the old habits unreliable. History's menu is full of emergency substitutions. A quirky tidbit from the world of war and potatoes is that some prisoners of war became accidental ambassadors for the crop. Antoine-Augustin Parmentier, held prisoner during the 7 Years' War, up potatoes in Prussia, and later became one of France's most famous potato promoters. Imagine being served prison rations and thinking, oddly enough, this could improve national nutrition. Most people would simply complain, and frankly, they would have a point. But Parmentier noticed possibility inside hardship. You hear rain begin to fall on canvas. The camp darkens, water taps on tent cloth, gathers in boot prints, and hisses softly when it hits the fire. Men pull cloaks tighter. A quartermaster shouts about distribution, and several soldiers pretend not to hear until the word food appears. The potato stew is ladled into bowls or wooden cups. Hands wrap around the heat. The first mouthful is bland, perhaps undercooked, possibly smoky. It is also magnificent, because hunger is the finest seasoning and the least polite dinner guest. Potatoes shape wartime life beyond armies themselves. Families left behind depend on them when men are away, when grain fields are requisitioned, when prices rise, or when markets break down. A garden plot becomes a quiet fortress. Women and children tend it. Older people guard the stores. Tubers are buried in clamps, cellars, pits, or straw. The smell of storage rooms is cool, dark, and slightly sweet, with a hint of earth and decay. Each sound matters there, the scrape of a shovel, the rustle of straw, the soft thud of a potato placed carefully among others. Historians still argue over how directly potato cultivation influenced European military power. Some emphasize that better food supplies helped populations grow, giving states more soldiers and labourers. Others warn that armies depended on many supply systems, including grain, livestock, preserved foods, taxation, roads, and money. The potato was one piece of a wider structure. Still, it was a powerful piece, especially because it made rural survival more reliable in regions exposed to bad harvests and military disruption. You pass a field near a fortress where soldiers have been ordered to plant potatoes. Their efforts are not graceful. One man digs too shallowly. Another complains that he joined the army to avoid farming, which suggests he misunderstood both farming and armies. An officer insists the work continue. The earth is turned. Tubers are placed. Rows are formed. Months later, if weather allows, the garrison may have food close at hand. Strategy sometimes looks less like a heroic charge and more like a bored corporal holding a shovel. The potato's value in war is not romantic. It is logistical. It fills gaps. It steadies households. It feeds bodies cheaply. It can be grown in scattered plots, stored with care, and cooked without elaborate equipment. It gives calories to people who must march, rebuild, flee, or endure occupation. It is the opposite of a battle anthem. It is the quiet bowl eaten with dirty hands beside a dying fire. Evening settles over the road. The marching column has moved on, leaving churned mud, broken straw, and the faint smell of smoke. In the village, someone digs at the edge of a garden, searching for what remains beneath the soil. A child holds a basket. The first potatoes drop in with soft, reassuring thuds. You feel the weight of one in your palm. It is solid, plain, and stubborn. Around it, states rise and quarrel. Armies pass with drums and hunger. Maps are redrawn by men who may never touch the fields that sustain them. But beneath the noise, the potato continues its patient work, feeding the ordinary bodies upon which extraordinary events depend. You walk into Ireland beneath a sky the colour of pewter, where mist hangs over green fields and hedgerows shine with rain. The air is cool and wet against your face. Grass brushes your ankles. Somewhere beyond a low stone wall, a cow shifts in the drizzle. and from a small cottage comes the smell of turf smoke, damp wool, and potatoes boiling over the hearth. It is a soft landscape at first glance, almost tender, but under that softness lies pressure. The potato has found a powerful home here. In rural Ireland, especially among poorer tenant families, the potato becomes more than a useful crop. It becomes the centre of survival. The climate suits it. The cool, moist weather helps tubers grow well. Small plots can produce enough food to support large families when planted carefully. Mixed with milk, buttermilk, or a little fish when available, potatoes can create a diet that is plain but surprisingly nourishing. A bowl of steaming potatoes may not impress a visiting aristocrat, but it can keep children alive through long seasons of scarcity. You enter a one-room cabin where the walls are whitewashed but rough. The floor feels uneven beneath your feet. A black iron pot hangs over a low fire. Blue smoke coils upward and escapes imperfectly through the roof. The family sits near the warmth, hands extended, faces lit in amber. Potatoes tumble from the pot into a shallow basket, their skins splitting, steam rising like breath from the earth itself. A jug of buttermilk waits nearby. This meal is simple, repetitive, and deeply important. A mainstream historical fact rests in this room by the early 19th century. Many poor Irish families depended heavily on the potato, especially the high-yielding varieties grown on small holdings. This dependence was shaped by land tenure, poverty, population growth, and the demands of rent within a society where much land was controlled by landlords and worked by tenants. The potato allowed survival on tiny plots, but that very survival helped deepen a dangerous reliance on one crop. You step outside and feel rain soak into your sleeves. The plot beside the cabin is narrow, carefully worked, and intensely valued. Ridges run in long lines through the field. This method, often called lazy bed cultivation, is not lazy at all, which feels like a little historical slander. Farmers use spades to raise ridges, improve drainage, and plant seed potatoes in heavy or wet soil. The work is back-breaking. The word lazy seems to have been invented by someone who was not doing it. The soil smells rich and wet. A spade cuts into it with a soft sucking sound. Bare hands press seed pieces into place. The touch of the earth is cold, almost numbing. Children help where they can, carrying baskets, placing tubers, chasing away birds, or simply getting muddy with great dedication. Family's food future lies in these ridges. Rent may be owed, wages may be uncertain. Grain may be grown for sale rather than eaten at home. But potatoes in this little plot are immediate, intimate, and necessary. Ireland's relationship with the potato is often described as if it were only a love story between people and crop. It is more complicated. The potato supports population growth because it can feed many people from limited land. Families marry young in some areas, raise children, and divide land into smaller holdings. The crop makes this possible. But possible is not the same as secure. A household surviving on potatoes can appear stable while standing on a very narrow bridge. A quirky tidbit from Irish potato culture is the sheer scale of daily consumption. Adult labourers might eat several pounds of potatoes in a day, sometimes arranged in piles on a table or floor, with family members taking from the common heap and dipping them into milk. To modern ears, that sounds like a dare issued by a potato with too much confidence. But for people doing hard physical labour, the calories mattered. The meal was monotonous, yes, but it was filling, warm, and familiar. The cabin grows quiet as everyone eats. The sound is soft skins peeling, breath cooling hot pieces, the scrape of a wooden bowl, rain ticking on the roof. A baby sleeps near the hearth. An older man tells a story in a low voice. The atmosphere has warmth, but also a kind of closeness that comes from having little margin for error. Every stored potato matters. Every diseased plant would matter too much. Different potato varieties grow in Ireland over time, but dependence on a limited range becomes perilous. One widely grown type, often associated with later disaster, is the lumper. It yields heavily and can grow in poor soil, which makes it attractive to poor tenants. It is not the finest tasting potato by many accounts, but taste becomes a luxury when land is scarce and hunger practical. The lumper does its job until disease reveals the terrible cost of sameness. Scholars still debate the balance between the potato's benefits and the social conditions that made dependence so dangerous. Some emphasize that the crop improved nutrition and allowed families to survive where grain alone could not. Others stress that landlordism, poverty, export-oriented agriculture, political inequality, and insecure tenancy trapped people in reliance on a single food source. The potato did not create oppression by itself. It became woven into a system where one crop carried far too much human weight. You walk along a lane lined with stone walls. The rain has stopped, but droplets cling to grass and sparkle in a thin wash of light. From several cottages comes the same earthy smell of cooking potatoes. It is dinner, again and again, in home after home. The repetition is not boring to those who need it. It is reassurance. It is routine. It is a promise that the field has answered. In market towns, the contrast sharpens. Carts move along muddy streets. Grain, butter, livestock, and other goods may be sold, taxed, exported, or consumed by those who can afford them. Poor rural families often live closer to the potato pit than to the marketplace. Their economy is measured in ridges, rents, labour days, and whether the tubers keep through winter without rotting. Civilization here is not abstract. It is the question of what is in the pot tonight. You pause beside a storage pit covered with straw and earth. Inside, potatoes lie in darkness, cool and protected. The smell is damp, starchy, and faintly sweet. A hand reaches in and chooses carefully, avoiding damaged tubers. Waste is not casual here. Waste is hunger practicing early. As twilight settles, the land becomes very still. Mist gathers in hollows. A dog barks once, then stops. Smoke rises straight for a moment before the breeze takes it sideways. The green fields look peaceful, almost dreamlike. But you know how much depends on the hidden crop beneath them. The potato has given Ireland nourishment, population growth, and a way for poor families to endure impossible limits. It has also created a vulnerability so deep that it waits like weather beyond the horizon. For now, the pot is full, the children are fed, the hearth is warm, the tubers rest underground and in storage, silent, ordinary, trusted. You stand at the doorway and listen to rain begin again. Soft on thatch, soft on soil, soft on the ridges where a nation's daily bread is not bread at all, but the humble potato. You stand in an Irish field as evening gathers, and the air feels too wet, too still, too close against your skin. A low mist drifts between the ridges. The potato leaves, green and familiar only days ago, now carry dark stains along their edges. The smell is strange, not the honest earthiness of harvest, not the warm comfort of boiling tubers, but something sour, damp, and faintly rotten, as if the field has begun to breathe out sickness. At first, people hope it is nothing. A farmer bends over the plants and rubs a leaf between his fingers. It comes away soft, blackened, collapsing. The touch is wrong. Leaves should tear or bruise, not melt. He straightens and looks across the field. More patches show the same dark marks. In the dim light, the rows seem bruised. A crow calls from a wall, because naturally the crow chooses this moment to be dramatic. The disease moving through the crop is potato late blight, caused by the organism Phytophthora infestans. In the 1840s, it spreads across parts of Europe and then devastates Ireland, where dependence on the potato is dangerously high among poor rural communities. The blight attacks leaves and stems, then ruins tubers in the ground and in storage. A plant can look damaged one day and seem destroyed soon after, especially in cool, Wet weather. For families whose food supply lies in those ridges, the speed is terrifying. You walk slowly between the rows, moist soil grips your boots, the leaves brush your legs, limp and wet. A faint white mould appears along the underside of infected foliage in the right conditions, delicate as lace and horrifying as a whispered verdict. The atmosphere is quiet, but not peaceful. It is the quiet of people listening for bad news they already suspect. Inside nearby cottages, rumours travel faster than carts. One family says the tops have blackened. Another says the tubers are sound if dug quickly. Another cuts open a potato and finds brown rot spreading inside. People compare smells, colours, textures, and prayers. Everyone becomes an expert because everyone must. But knowledge is hard to gather when hunger is standing in the doorway, tapping its foot. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this heavy air. The potato blight reached Ireland in 1845 and caused repeated crop failures over the following years, contributing to the Great Famine. The disaster was not only biological, it unfolded within a society shaped by poverty, insecure tenancy, political inequality, and dependence on the potato among many poor families. The disease struck the crop, but the suffering spread through the whole structure of life. You enter a cabin where a woman cuts into stored potatoes by candlelight. The blade makes a dull sound against the table. One tuber looks firm outside, but inside it is stained and wet. She sets it aside. Another is worse. Another releases a smell that makes a child turn away. The room is warm from the fire, yet a chill seems to move through it. The familiar store, once security, has become uncertain. That is one of the cruelest parts. Food that appears safe can fail in your hand. The science behind the blight is not understood by most people at the time. Germ theory is not yet widely accepted in the modern sense. Many explanations circulate: bad air, damp weather, electricity in the atmosphere, divine judgment, soil exhaustion, imported disease, or mysterious corruption. Some ideas are practical observations wrapped in incomplete science. Others are fear searching for a costume. When the fields blacken overnight, the human mind grabs whatever explanation is nearby. Here is a quirky tidbit. If anything in this setting can be called quirky without sounding rude to suffering newspapers and officials, sometimes describe the diseased potatoes with intense, almost theatrical disgust, comparing their smell and texture in ways that made the tuber seem morally guilty. The potato, which had quietly kept families alive, was suddenly spoken of like a traitor. It is unfair, of course. The poor thing was not plotting. It was infected. But people often blame the object closest to their fear. You step outside again. Rain begins as a fine spray, barely audible, settling on your hair and sleeves. The field smells worse in the wet. A man digs frantically, tossing potatoes into a basket, checking each one. Some are still usable. Some are already soft. Some will rot later, even if they look acceptable now. His fingers are coated in cold mud. His back aches. He works against time, but time is not negotiating. Across Europe, potato blight also causes damage, but Ireland's vulnerability is severe because so many poor households rely heavily on the crop. The same agricultural strength that once supported life on small plots now becomes a trap. High yield, narrow dependence, limited alternatives, poverty, rent obligations, and weak political protection combine into disaster. The blight is the spark in a house already built of dry straw, even though the weather is, with grim irony, far too wet. Scholars still argue over the relative weight of natural disease and human policy in the famine's scale. Some focus on the unprecedented biological shock and repeated harvest failures. Others emphasise that food continued to exist in Ireland in other forms, while access, poverty, exports, relief policy, and government ideology shaped who lived and who starved. The debate matters because a famine is never only about the absence of food. It is also about who can claim food, buy food, receive food, or be denied it. You hear a cart approach along the road, its wheels splash through puddles. People gather, hoping for news, seed, meal, wages, relief, anything. Voices stay low at first, then sharpen. A baby cries. An old woman crosses herself. The damp air presses everything downward: smoke, sound, breath, hope. In the field, the potato plants continue to collapse. Their stems darken. Leaves curl. The ordinary green rows, once so reassuring, now look like a message written in rot. Yet even now, people do not fully know what is coming. They know fear, certainly. They know hunger may arrive. But the full shape of catastrophe is still forming, field by field, household by household, in the wet dark of the soil. You hold a diseased tuber in your palm. It feels too soft, its skin giving under your thumb. The smell clings to your fingers, sour and intimate. This is not just a failed crop. It is the failure of trust. For generations, the potato has been the quiet answer to poor soil, small plots, and empty cupboards. Now that answer has begun to dissolve. Night settles. The rain continues, soft and relentless on leaves, thatch, and stone. Inside the cottages, families count what remains. Outside, the blight moves invisibly through damp fields. The potato, once hidden strength, has become hidden danger, and the silence beneath the soil feels deeper than sleep. You stand at the edge of a road in Western Ireland, where the mud is deep, the hedges are bare, and the sky seems to have forgotten how to brighten. The rain has paused, but everything remains wet. Water beads on wool shawls. It shines on the backs of carts. It gathers in the footprints of people walking away from homes that no longer hold enough food, work, or certainty. The road is crowded, but strangely quiet. Families move with bundles tied in cloth. A mother carries a child against her chest. An older boy drags a sack that bumps against stones. A man walks with a shovel over one shoulder, though there may be no field left for him to dig. The air smells of damp earth, peat smoke, unwashed clothes, and boiled meal from a relief pot somewhere beyond the bend. The sound is not one great cry, but many small sounds coughing, wheels creaking, shoes sucking free from mud, whispered names. The famine has become movement. When potato harvests fail repeatedly, hunger does not stay politely inside the field. It enters rent day, market day, church, marriage, childbirth, burial, and memory. It changes the shape of villages. Some cabins empty. Some families enter workhouses. Some seek wages on public works. Some depend on soup kitchens or charity. Some die where they are. Some leave Ireland entirely, carrying grief across the sea in the cramped holds of emigrant ships. A mainstream historical fact rests heavily on this road. The Great Famine of the 1840s caused mass death and mass emigration from Ireland, with roughly 1 million people dying and around 1 million more leaving during the famine years and their immediate aftermath. The population of Ireland fell dramatically, and the consequences reshaped Irish society, politics, family memory, and communities abroad. You walk toward a town where a workhouse rises behind stone walls. Its windows look cold. Inside, the air is close with bodies, disinfectant, damp straw, and fear. The workhouse is meant as relief, but relief here often comes with separation, shame, discipline, and loss of independence. Families may be divided. Food is measured. Rules are strict. The building hums with low voices, footsteps, and the brittle sound of official order trying to manage human desperation. Outside, another line forms near a soup distribution point. Steam rises from a large pot, carrying the smell of grain, vegetables, and thin broth. People wait with bowls, tins, or whatever vessels they can find. The warmth drifting through the air is almost painful in its promise. A child leans toward it. An old man closes his eyes. No one jokes. Hunger has a way of making even sarcasm sit down and behave. The famine's political meaning grows bitter. Many Irish people see British government relief as inadequate, delayed, or shaped by harsh economic ideas. Officials debate markets, dependency, public works, poor laws, and the dangers of too much assistance. While people on the ground need food before philosophy finishes combing its hair, food continues to be produced in Ireland in forms other than potatoes, but many of the poorest cannot access enough of it. That difference between food existing and food being reachable becomes one of the central cruelties of the disaster. You pass a field where grain stands behind a wall. It rustles in the wind, dry and pale. Nearby, a family with no secure claim to food walks past it. The sound of the grain is soft, almost beautiful. That beauty feels terrible. It is possible for a landscape to contain both food and hunger, and that is when famine becomes not only natural calamity, but social indictment. A quirky tidbit from famine memory is the strange role of the phrase coffin ships. It was used for overcrowded emigrant vessels where disease and death were common during desperate crossings. The phrase is grim, but it captures how migration could feel like both rescue and danger packed into the same wooden hull. Imagine escaping hunger by entering a ship that smells of bilge water, sickness, salt, fear, and hope. Not exactly a travel brochure, unless the brochure was designed by a very pessimistic ghost. You follow emigrants toward a port. The sea air arrives before the sea itself, sharp with salt and tar. Gulls wheel above warehouses. Dock workers shout. Planks groan under feet. Families clutch tickets, bundles, rosaries, letters, and last pieces of home. Some carry seed memories more than possessions: the field ridge, the hearth, the particular smell of potatoes boiling at dusk. A girl turns to look back at the road, though there is nothing visible now but mist and movement. The ships that leave for Britain, Canada, the United States, Australia, and elsewhere carry more than passengers. They carry language, songs, anger, Catholic devotional life, political ideas, family stories, and the memory of failed potato fields. Irish communities abroad grow through sorrow and survival. In cities across the Atlantic, newcomers crowd into poor districts, take hard jobs, face prejudice, send money home, and build institutions that keep memory alive. Scholars still argue over how the famine should be interpreted: as a tragic natural disaster made worse by policy failure, as a colonial catastrophe rooted in structural injustice, or in some arguments, as something closer to deliberate neglect. The evidence is debated fiercely because moral responsibility matters. What is not debated is that ordinary people suffered on a vast scale, and that political choices shape the depth and duration of that suffering. You step into a cabin abandoned in haste. The door hangs open. The hearth is cold. A broken stool lies near the wall. In one corner a few spoiled potatoes remain, shriveled and dark. The smell is stale, earthy, and sad. Rain has blown through the doorway and dampened the floor. You hear only wind, the ticking of water from the roof, and far off, a dog barking. This emptiness becomes memory too. In later generations, the famine lives in stories told softly, in silences at tables, in mistrust of authority, in political movements for land reform and national self-determination, and in the ache of diaspora families who know they came from people who had to leave. The potato remains at the centre of the memory, but not as the villain. It is remembered as the food that sustained life until disease and injustice made dependence catastrophic. You stand again on the road as dusk lowers itself over the fields. The travellers continue, their figures fading into grey. Their bundles are small. Their losses are not. The air grows colder. Smoke rises from cottages that are still occupied, and from others, no smoke rises at all. A potato once meant warmth in a bowl, food from a narrow plot, children fed despite poverty. Now its failure has opened doors that cannot be closed. People leave, Names scatter, songs cross oceans, grief becomes inheritance, and still, beneath the wet soil of abandoned ridges, a few tubers remain silent in the dark. They are not enough to save what has been lost, but they remind you that history is often carried by humble things: a crop, a road, a bowl, a ticket, a memory, and the footsteps of people walking toward an uncertain shore. You arrive in a mountain market far from the Andes and far from Ireland, where the morning air is bright with voices, bells, baskets, and the soft shuffle of feet. The potato has crossed into wider worlds now, carried by traders, soldiers, colonists, missionaries, migrants, botanists, and ordinary cooks who care less about global history than about whether supper will be filling. Around you, sacks are opened, tubers spill into shallow piles, and hands test them by weight and firmness. The smell is familiar, even in unfamiliar places: soil, straw, damp cloth, smoke from breakfast fires, and the faint sweetness of stored starch. The potato has a talent for belonging almost anywhere, provided the climate gives it enough coolness, moisture, and human patience. It does not insist on one language. It does not demand one cuisine. It enters kitchens quietly, then begins changing them from the inside. In parts of Asia, the potato travels through imperial routes and local farming experiments. It reaches China, India, Japan, and other regions through several channels over time. It settles especially well in highland and temperate zones, where it can fit into farming calendars beside grains, legumes, and vegetables. In some places, it is grown as a vegetable. In others, it becomes a staple for poor households or a useful crop for difficult land. As usual, the potato does not care what title it receives, as long as someone plants it. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this busy market by the 18th and 19th centuries. Potatoes had spread widely beyond Europe and the Americas, becoming established in many parts of Asia and later growing in importance across Africa and other regions. Its global expansion was tied to colonial trade, migration, state agricultural programs, and local adoption. The crop was never simply copied from one place to another. People adapted it to local soils, tastes, storage methods, and cooking traditions. You walk through a Chinese highland village where terraced fields climb green hills under a pale sky. The air smells of rain, wood smoke, and tea leaves drying somewhere nearby. Potato plants grow beside maize, buckwheat, or other local crops. Their leaves tremble in the breeze. A farmer lifts tubers from the soil with a hoe, tapping dirt away before dropping them into a basket. The sound is soft and hollow, like small knocks on wood. In China, potatoes become especially useful in cooler upland areas and later expand greatly as a food and commercial crop. They are sliced into stir-fries, stewed, shredded, boiled, or turned into noodles and starch. The potato learns new textures here. It can be crisp, slippery, soft, or chewy. It is no longer only a boiled lump waiting beside the hearth. It has entered the wok, and frankly, it seems pleased with the career change. You move next through a hillside in India, where mist drifts across tea country, and the earth feels rich beneath your feet. Potatoes grow in cooler regions and become part of local cuisines with remarkable ease. They absorb spices willingly, which is one of their finest personality traits. Turmeric stains them gold, chilies wake them up, mustard seed, cumin, coriander, ginger, and garlic turn their mildness into warmth. A potato curry bubbles in a pot, fragrant enough to make even a sleepy historian pay attention. A quirky tidbit from the potato's global life is that once it entered South Asian cooking, it became so deeply naturalized that many people later treated it as if it had always belonged there. Dishes such as spiced potato fillings, potato curries, and fried snacks feel ancient in comfort. Even though the crop itself came from the Americas, this is how food memory works. Give a new ingredient a few generations, a good spice blend, and a grandmother's approval, and suddenly it becomes tradition. history politely steps aside. In Japan, the potato arrives through foreign contact and later becomes important in regions such as Hokkaido. The cool northern climate suits it well. There, fields stretch under wide skies, and the air carries the smell of damp soil and sea wind. Potatoes become food, starch, and eventually part of modern snacks and comfort dishes. A crop that began in Andean highlands now grows under northern Japanese clouds. The journey feels improbable, yet the plant itself remains practical, almost unimpressed. Africa's potato story is equally varied. The crop takes root in highland areas such as parts of East Africa, where elevation offers cooler growing conditions. Farmers plant it in small plots, often for both household food and market sale. In the Ethiopian and Kenyan highlands, for example, potatoes become valuable because they can mature faster than some grains and provide cash as well as food. You stand in a market where women sort potatoes into baskets, while goats complain nearby, because goats believe every market is about them. The air smells of dust, vegetables, charcoal smoke, and sun-warmed sacks. Scholars still debate how to measure the potato's impact across different global regions, because adoption was uneven and sometimes poorly recorded. In some places, it became a crucial food security crop. In others, it remained secondary, grown for markets or special dishes rather than daily survival. Climate, altitude, colonial policy, transport, taste, seed quality, and local farming systems all shaped its role. The potato's global history is not one story spreading smoothly across a map. It is many local stories, each with its own soil under the fingernails. You notice how the potato changes when it meets different kitchens. In the Andes, it might be dried, boiled, or served with clay. In Europe, it becomes mash, dumplings, bread extender, soup, and fried comfort. In India, it folds into spices. In China, it becomes stir-fried shreds or starch noodles. In East Africa, it may be boiled with greens, fried, stewed, or sold in markets for school fees and household needs. The same tuber accepts many identities without complaint. A potato is humble, yes, but also astonishingly adaptable. Rather like a guest who arrives with no demands and somehow ends up helping with the dishes. You walk through another market as the afternoon warms. Traders call prices. A knife slices into a tuber with a clean, wet sound. Children carry small bags home. A cook drops potato pieces into hot oil, and the sudden sizzle rises brightly through the air. The smell turns golden, salty, irresistible. Around the world, the potato keeps entering ordinary moments' lunch stalls, farm kitchens, festival foods, school meals, roadside snacks, military rations, home gardens. Global crops can carry painful histories of conquest and inequality, and the potato is no exception. It moves through empires, but it also becomes local through labour and care. Farmers save seed, families invent recipes, markets build trust. Over time, the potato stops being foreign not because its origin disappears, but because people give it new meanings. As evening settles, you sit near a market stall where unsold potatoes rest under burlap. The cloth feels rough under your hand. Dust floats in warm light. The world around you speaks many languages, but the tubers remain quietly understandable. Plant me, cook me, store me, share me. Across continents, the potato becomes not one civilization's possession, but a common underground companion, shaped again and again by the hands that lift it from the soil. You step into a 19th century laboratory where the light falls through tall windows onto wooden tables, glass jars, notebooks, dried leaves, and trays of carefully labelled tubers. The room smells of ink, dust, alcohol preservative, old paper, and soil brought in on boots. Outside, carts rattle over stones. Inside, a botanist bends over a potato flower with a magnifying lens. as if this small pale bloom has agreed to reveal the secrets of life. It has not, of course. Plants are very calm about making scholars work hard. The potato has entered science. For generations, farmers have known it through touch, taste, storage, weather, and hunger. Now botanists, agronomists, chemists, and plant breeders begin examining it through classification, experiment, and controlled observation. They want to know what the potato is, how it reproduces, why it fails, how disease spreads, and whether better varieties can be created. The question is no longer only how to grow enough potatoes. It becomes how to understand the potato deeply enough to protect it. You move past shelves stacked with specimens. Some tubers are smooth and pale, others are purple, red, long, round, finger-like, knotted, or speckled. Their skins feel cool and slightly dusty beneath your fingertips. A scientist has written names beside them, though the names keep changing as classification improves. The potato belongs to the genus Solanum, a sprawling botanical family full of useful crops and troublesome relatives. Trying to organise it is like sorting a large family reunion, where half the cousins look alike and several refuse to answer clearly. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this room. Scientific study of potatoes expanded greatly after the 19th century blight disasters as researchers investigated plant disease, breeding, inheritance, and the value of diverse potato varieties. The need was urgent. Farmers and governments had learned that dependence on narrow varieties could be dangerous. If a disease could ruin a crop across whole regions, then agriculture needed more than hope and good weather. It needed knowledge. You hear the scratch of a pen, a researcher records the shape of leaves, the colour of flowers, the number of tubers per plant, the texture of skin, the flavour after cooking, and resistance to disease. The atmosphere is quiet but full of concentration. Someone coughs in a corner, a burner flickers. Rain taps against the glass. The potato sits on the table, silent and faintly ridiculous, while human beings attempt to rescue civilization by measuring its lumps. Plant breeding grows from the patient crossing of varieties. Potatoes can be propagated by planting tubers, which preserves a variety almost exactly. But breeders also use true seed from potato berries to create new combinations. Those berries are small, green, tomato-like fruits that appear after flowering. They are not the part to eat. Let us be very clear with the sleepy listener, and the adventurous kitchen goblin alike do not snack on potato berries. The plant is generous underground, not everywhere, not from seed. New plants may show different traits. One might yield heavily, another might resist a disease, another might store well through winter, another might taste pleasant instead of vaguely like boiled regret. Breeders select, test, discard, and try again. The work takes seasons. It requires patience, land, records, and disappointment. A promising plant may fail in another climate. A fine-tasting potato may bruise easily. A high-yielding one may be vulnerable to disease. Improvement is rarely a straight road. It is more like walking through fog with a basket and a notebook. A quirky tidbit from potato science is that the potato helped push people to think more seriously about plant pathology. Late blight was eventually understood not as bad air or moral failing, but as a biological disease caused by a specific organism. That shift sounds obvious now, but it required changes in scientific thinking. For centuries, people had blamed weather, fumes, soil moods, and occasionally divine irritation. The potato became one of the crops that forced science to look at invisible enemies with sharper eyes. You enter an experimental field beside an agricultural station. The sky is clear after rain, and the soil gives off a rich, damp smell. Rows of different potatoes stretch in measured plots, each marked by stakes. Leaves rustle softly. Bees wander through flowers. Researchers walk slowly with clipboards, inspecting plants for vigour, spots, wilting, and yield. Their boots press into mud, and their coats brush wet foliage. The field looks peaceful, but it is also a trial ground where each variety is being judged. The potato's genetic complexity makes breeding challenging. Cultivated potatoes are often tetraploid, meaning they carry 4 sets of chromosomes rather than 2. That makes inheritance complicated, like trying to predict family traits when everyone brings 4 suitcases of ancestry and none are labelled neatly. Breeders can still make progress, but traits do not always pass along in simple patterns. The potato gives much, but it does enjoy keeping scientists humble. Historians of agriculture still argue over how quickly scientific breeding transformed actual farming compared with farmer selection and local experience. Some emphasize the growing role of research stations, government programs, and formal varieties. Others point out that farmers continue to test, adapt, save, and reject potatoes based on their own fields and kitchens. The boundary between scientific improvement and practical knowledge is not a wall. It is a conversation, sometimes polite, sometimes muddy. You pause near a herbarium cabinet. Pressed potato leaves lie flat on paper, labelled with place names and dates. They look fragile, like memories of fields nearby. Glass jars hold diseased samples, pale roots, and preserved stems. The smell of preservatives stings your nose. There is something tender about this attempt to hold plants still long enough to learn from them. Agriculture is usually movement sprouting, flowering, rotting, harvesting, eating. Science pins down a moment and asks it questions. In the Andes, the potato's diversity remains a living library. Scientists eventually recognize that wild relatives and traditional varieties carry traits that may help resist disease, tolerate cold, survive drought, or adapt to poor soils. The old farmer's basket and the modern breeder's greenhouse are connected by need. A strange purple tuber from a mountain village may hold genetic value that no laboratory could simply invent from scratch. The past sits inside the seed stock, quietly useful. You smell potatoes cooking in a test kitchen attached to the station. Breeding is not only about survival, people must want to eat the result. A new potato may look excellent in a yield table and still fail if it cooks badly, tastes watery, turns grey, or refuses to mash without behaving like glue. So samples are boiled, baked, fried, and tasted. Steam clouds the windows, forks break open tubers. Someone makes notes about texture, someone else chews thoughtfully, wearing the grave expression of a judge at a very starchy trial. As evening fills the laboratory, lamps are lit, shadows gather around jars and books. Outside, the experimental plots darken. The potato has become an object of science, but not less mysterious for that. Under the lens, it reveals cells, spores, flowers, chromosomes, and disease. In the field, it still depends on rain, soil, hands, and luck. You hold a labelled tuber in your palm. Its skin is ordinary. Its future is not. Science has begun to learn that protecting the potato means understanding variation, disease, inheritance, and the wisdom already grown into countless local forms. The humble crop remains humble, but now it carries microscopes, notebooks, and entire research programs in its shadow. You step into a city morning where factory whistles cut through fog, cartwheels rattle over cobblestones, and the smell of coal smoke settles heavily over brick streets. The potato has left the quiet field and entered the age of machines, wages, lunch pails, crowded housing, and food sold by the paper cone. It is still earthy and plain at heart, but now it is being peeled, sliced, fried, mashed, pressed, packed, distilled, and transformed with all the enthusiasm of an industrial society that sees a humble crop and immediately asks how many products can be made from it. The answer is, apparently, a lot. In working-class neighbourhoods, potatoes are everywhere. They simmer in stews, thicken soups, stretch meat, fill pies, and appear beside fish, sausages, cabbage, onions, or whatever the household can afford, a pot of potatoes can feed tired bodies returning from mills, mines, docks, and workshops. The tubers are cheap, filling, and forgiving. They do not require delicate treatment. A cook can boil them while doing 3 other tasks and mildly arguing with a child, which is, in many kitchens, the true test of usefulness. You walk past a street vendor standing beside a brazier. Steam rises from roasted potatoes wrapped in cloth to keep them warm. The air smells of coal smoke, horse manure, rain on stone, and the comforting sweetness of hot starch. A worker buys one, turning it from hand to hand because it is too hot, then cracks it open. The inside glows pale and soft. Salt stings the steam. For a moment, the city's hard edges blur into warmth. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this urban scene during the 19th and 20th centuries. Potatoes became a major industrial food crop, used not only for household cooking but also for starch production, alcohol, livestock feed, processed foods, chips, and fries. As cities grew and food systems expanded, the potato adapted to new technologies of storage, transport, and mass preparation. It moved from the field into factories and from kitchens into global commerce. You enter a starch factory where the floor is wet and the air is cool, dense, and slightly sour with the smell of crushed potatoes. Workers shovel tubers into washing drums. Water splashes. Belts turn. Machinery grinds the potatoes into pulp, separating starch from fibre and liquid. The noise is constant clanking metal, rushing water, shouted instructions, the slap of wet sacks. Potato starch becomes useful far beyond the dinner table. It thickens foods, stiffens textiles, helps make paper, and enters industries that most diners never imagine while eating a comforting spoonful of mash. The potato also becomes alcohol. Distillers ferment its starches into spirits, especially in parts of northern and eastern Europe. A tuber that once fed mountain farmers and peasant families now enters taverns in liquid form, which feels like a dramatic career pivot, but not an entirely surprising one. Humanity has rarely met a carbohydrate it did not consider fermenting. The smell in such places is sharp, yeasty, warm, and a little dangerous. Copper equipment gleams. Barrels rest in dim corners. The potato, as usual, remains innocent while people make complicated choices around it. A quirky tidbit from this industrial world is that potato chips likely began as a thin, crisp novelty in the 19th century and gradually became a mass snack through packaging, frying technology, and commercial distribution. The exact origin story is surrounded by legend, including tales of an annoyed cook slicing potatoes extra thin for a difficult customer. It is a pleasing story, whether or not every detail behaves itself under scrutiny. History often seasons food origins with a little theatre, because apparently plain facts are not always salty enough. You move into a small fried fish shop where potatoes meet hot fat and become something irresistible. The room is warm, noisy, and fragrant. Oil crackles, steam fogs the windows, freshly cut potatoes drop into bubbling fat with a bright hiss, emerging golden, crisp at the edges, soft within, wrapped with fried fish. They become an urban meal associated strongly with Britain, though frying potatoes takes many forms across countries. Cheap, hot, portable food suits, industrial life. People leaving work need calories quickly. They need warmth in their hands. They need dinner that does not require a dining room, because many do not have much of one. The potato fits the new pace of life. It can be stored in bulk, transported by rail, sold in sacks, processed into standard products, and cooked quickly in commercial kitchens. It becomes part of school meals, canteens, army kitchens, boarding houses, restaurants, and street stalls. It feeds families in cramped apartments where time, money, and space are short. It also feeds the imagination of comfort. A fried potato, salty and hot, offers a small pleasure that feels democratic even when the world around it is not. Historians still argue over how to interpret the potato's industrial transformation. Some see it as a story of abundance, efficiency, and broader access to cheap calories. Others emphasize the loss of variety, the rise of processed diets, harsh labor in food industries, and dependence on long supply chains. Both views can be true at once. A paper cone of fries can be comforting and part of a massive industrial system. A chip can be delightful and also a tiny ambassador of salt, oil, branding, and agriculture at scale. The potato contains multitudes, which is impressive for something so quiet. You stand inside a railway depot where sacks of potatoes are stacked high on platforms. Porters lift them with practiced grunts. The burlap scratches against hands and shoulders. The air smells of steam engines, soot, damp rope, and raw tubers. Rail transport helps connect rural production to urban demand. Potatoes that once might have been eaten near where they grew can now travel farther and faster. Cities depend on this movement. Their millions of meals begin in fields many citizens will never see. In the home kitchen, the potato remains personal despite all this machinery. You watch a tired woman peel potatoes into a basin. The knife moves in a slow spiral. Skins fall with soft wet sounds. A child waits by the table, chin in hand. The pot begins to boil. Steam gathers on the window. Outside, the city glows with gaslight and soot. Inside, dinner becomes possible because the potato is still affordable enough, still familiar enough, still filling enough to carry the evening. By night, the factory's quiet only slightly. Somewhere, potatoes are being loaded, washed, fried, canned, mashed, or pressed into starch. Somewhere else, a worker eats them with gravy from a chipped plate. A child steals one crisp chip before supper and burns a finger. A vendor wraps hot fries in paper. A distiller checks a vat. A merchant counts sacks. The potato has become modern without becoming grand. It does not sit above industry like a king. It moves through it like water through pipes, necessary and unnoticed. In the glow of furnaces, under the hiss of oil, amid the smoke of cities, the humble tuber becomes comfort food, factory input, street meal, and staple. Civilization is changing faster now, and the potato changes with it, absorbing the heat, the pressure, and the appetite of the industrial age. You stand in a narrow garden behind a row of houses while the sky trembles with distant engines. The air smells of damp soil, coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and the faint metallic anxiety that seems to cling to wartime cities. Windows are dimmed, curtains are drawn. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a siren begins its long, rising cry, and the people around you pause with spades in their hands. The potato is back in uniform, though it still refuses to look heroic. In the 20th century, war reaches not only battlefields but kitchens, allotments, ration books, school meals, and small patches of turned earth behind factories and homes. Governments ask civilians to grow food. Families dig up lawns, flower beds, and vacant lots. Parks sprout rows of vegetables. A garden becomes a quiet act of national survival. Potatoes, dependable and filling, take a leading role because they offer calories from limited space and can be cooked in many ways when other foods are scarce. You kneel beside a woman planting seed potatoes in a trench. Her coat is old, her hands red from cold, and the soil sticks beneath her nails. She presses each piece into place with steady care, then covers it gently. The ground feels damp and crumbly. Rain gathers in the air, and the touch of it on your cheek is light as breath. A child stands nearby holding a tin bucket, trying to look helpful while mostly stepping where he should not. The garden does not mind. Gardens are used to human imperfection. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this scene during both world wars. Potatoes became important in civilian food security across several countries, especially through home gardens, allotments, and rationing systems. In Britain during the Second World War, campaigns encouraged people to grow more food, and potatoes were valued because they were filling, nutritious, and easier to produce domestically than many imported foods. The potato helped turn private soil into public resilience. You walk through a city allotment where rows of potato plants stand between cabbages, carrots, beans, and onions. The atmosphere is oddly peaceful despite the war. Bees drift over flowers. A train clanks in the distance. Spades scrape stones. People talk softly while working, exchanging advice about blight, storage, and whether this year's seed is any good. There is comfort in shared labour. There is also competition, because someone will always claim their potatoes are larger, earlier, or morally superior. Even in wartime, gardeners remain gardeners. In kitchens, rationing changes everything. Meat, sugar, fats, and imported foods may be limited. The potato becomes a reliable companion on the plate, boiled, mashed, baked, fried when fat allows, added to soups, stretched into cakes, or mixed with whatever else can be found. It fills the gap left by absence. It also absorbs flavours kindly, which is useful when flavour itself has been put on a strict budget. You enter a wartime kitchen in evening blackout. The room is warm and dim, lit by a shaded lamp. Steam clouds the window. A pot of potatoes bubbles on the stove, making a soft knocking sound as the pieces roll against the metal. The smell is earthy and plain, mingled with onions frying in a precious spoonful of fat. A woman consults a small leaflet of household advice, then ignores half of it because actual dinner has its own opinions. A child asks if there will be more. The answer is yes, if the potatoes stretch. Here is a quirky tidbit from wartime food culture governments and newspapers offered inventive potato recipes with a confidence that sometimes outran pleasure. Potato pastry, potato scones, potato puddings, potato cakes, potato everything. The crop was praised as wholesome, patriotic, and versatile, which it was, though one suspects even the potato occasionally wished for a day off. Still, those recipes helped households imagine abundance when cupboards looked severe. The potato also mattered under occupation and siege. In parts of Europe, people relied on gardens, hidden stores, and rural family connections to survive shortages. Urban residents travelled to the countryside to barter valuables for food. Farmers guarded crops carefully. A sack of potatoes could become wealth, mercy, temptation, or danger. In a world of ration cards and checkpoints, food was never just food. It was permission to continue. You walk along a cellar corridor where potatoes are stored in darkness. The air is cool and smells of earth, straw, stone, and a little mustiness. Your hand brushes the wall, rough and damp, in wooden bins. Tubers lie covered against light so they do not turn green. Each one is ordinary, but together they feel like a treasury. Above, bombs may fall, trains may stop, governments may shout through radios, but down here the potatoes wait with practical calm. Scholars still argue about how much wartime garden campaigns truly contributed to total food supply compared with industrial agriculture, imports, rationing policy, and state distribution. Some emphasize their symbolic value as much as their calories, because planting food gave civilians a sense of participation and control. Others point out that local production could genuinely ease pressure, especially when shipping was threatened. The truth, as usual, has muddy boots. Gardens fed bodies, but they also fed morale. In the countryside, wartime agriculture grows more organised and more demanding. Tractors replace some horses where available, though fuel and machinery can be scarce. Women, older men, prisoners, and youth groups work in fields as labour patterns shift. Potatoes must be planted, hoed, sprayed, lifted, sorted, stored, and transported. The work is heavy. A full sack strains the back. Cold mud clings to knees. The harvest smells of wet earth and tired hands. You stand with workers lifting potatoes at dusk. The sky glows dull pink behind bare trees. Forks turn the soil. Tubers appear like dull coins in the furrows. People stoop again and again, dropping them into baskets with soft thuds. No one speaks much. The sound of work is enough breath. Scrape, lift, drop, move. A thermos is passed. Tea tastes smoky and miraculous. In military life, potatoes continue to appear in rations, field kitchens, and base camps whenever supply allows. Soldiers may remember them with gratitude or boredom, depending on the cook and the day. Mashed potatoes can comfort. Watery potatoes can depress an entire unit. A roasted potato shared beside a stove in winter can feel like civilization itself has briefly returned and brought salt. Night settles over the city garden. The siren has stopped. The soil is dark and newly planted. Somewhere, a radio murmurs news in a careful voice. Somewhere else, potatoes boil for a late supper. People eat, save peelings, plan tomorrow's work, and pretend not to be afraid for a few minutes at a time. The potato in wartime is not glamorous. It does not end violence or make loss gentle, but it gives people something to do with their hands, something warm to place in a bowl, something hidden in the ground that promises a later meal. In years when the world feels torn open, the humble crop becomes a small form of steadiness, growing quietly while history shakes the windows. You stand at the edge of a vast potato field where the rows run so straight they seem drawn with a ruler across the earth. The morning is bright but cold. Mist lifts slowly from the soil. A tractor waits at the headland, its metal sides beaded with dew, its engine coughing awake with a low mechanical growl. The smell of diesel mixes with damp dirt, crushed leaves, fertilizer, and the faint green scent of potato vines. The field feels less like a cottage garden now and more like a factory with clouds above it. The potato has entered the industrial farming age. Here, scale changes everything. One family with a spade can grow food for survival. A modern farm with machinery, irrigation, storage sheds, chemical inputs, contracts, and trucks can grow potatoes for cities, factories, restaurants, supermarkets, and fast food chains. The crop is still underground, still lumpy, still wonderfully unfashionable in its natural state. But around it now stands a complicated world of science, finance, machinery, branding, and logistics. You watch a planter move across the field, dropping seed potatoes at measured intervals. The machine rattles and clicks. Soil folds neatly over each piece. A driver sits high above, enclosed from the wind, guiding the rows with practiced calm. The touch of the field has changed. It is no longer mainly fingertips, wooden tools, and bent backs. It is steel, rubber tires, hydraulic arms, and carefully calibrated spacing. The potato has not become less earthy, but the system around it has become precise. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this wide landscape during the 20th century. Potato farming became increasingly mechanized in many industrialized countries, with machines used for planting, cultivating, harvesting, grading, washing, and packing. Cold storage and transport networks allowed potatoes to move farther and last longer. Large processors created demand for specific varieties suited to chips, fries, flakes, starch, and frozen products. You walk into a storage building where thousands of potatoes rest in carefully managed darkness. Fans hum steadily. The air is cool, dry, and heavy with the smell of earth and stored starch. Your hand touches a wooden crate, rough and slightly dusty. Temperature and humidity are controlled to slow sprouting and decay. Light is kept away to prevent greening. The building feels like a sleeping city of tubers, all waiting for orders. In this system, not every potato can be just any potato. A potato for chips should have the right dry matter, sugar level, shape, and frying colour. A potato for long fries should be large, long, and consistent, because fast food customers apparently do not want a philosophical variety of fry shapes. A potato for fresh markets may need attractive skin and uniform size. The ancient diversity of potatoes narrows into categories demanded by machines and buyers: round, smooth, clean, predictable. This predictability brings abundance. It also brings risk. Large fields planted with the same variety can be efficient, but sameness may invite disease and pest problems. Farmers respond with crop rotation, certified seed, fungicides, pesticides, irrigation management, soil testing, and monitoring. The potato becomes a crop watched by agronomists, inspectors, processors, and market analysts. It is still humble, yes, but now it has paperwork. Nothing says modern civilization like a vegetable with a supply contract. A quirky tidbit from this industrial age is that potatoes intended for fast food fries are often judged by their length and sugar content with almost royal seriousness. Too much sugar can make fries darken during frying. Too small a tuber gives short fries, and short fries, in some commercial systems, are treated like a tiny tragedy. Somewhere, a potato may be perfectly delicious and still fail because it is not long enough for branding. The poor thing did its best. You move into a processing plant where potatoes arrive by truck in enormous loads. The building vibrates with machinery. Water rushes through flumes. Conveyor belts carry tubers past workers and scanners. Blades slice. Steam rises. Hot oil crackles. The air smells of raw potatoes, metal, water, salt, and frying fat. A potato enters one side covered in soil and leaves the other as frozen fries, chips in bags, dehydrated flakes, or starch. The transformation is efficient, loud, and slightly surreal. Industrial processing changes eating habits. Frozen fries can travel across countries and oceans. Potato chips become shelf-stable snacks sold in bright packaging. Instant mashed potatoes turn the tuber into flakes that can rehydrate in minutes. These foods are convenient, profitable, and widely loved. They also raise questions about nutrition, salt, fat, labour, packaging waste, and the distance between field and plate. The potato itself remains nutritious in many simple forms, but modern processing can turn it into something very different. Civilization has a gift for taking a sensible food and dressing it for a party that lasts too long. Historians and food scholars still argue over whether industrial agriculture should be seen mainly as a triumph of efficiency or a source of new vulnerabilities. Supporters point to lower costs, reliable supply, reduced seasonal hunger, and the ability to feed large urban populations. Critics point to monoculture, chemical dependence, soil degradation, energy use, corporate concentration, and the loss of local varieties. Both views touch the same field from different sides. The harvest is abundant, but abundance has shadows. You stand with a farmer checking irrigation lines in the afternoon. Water sprays in fine arcs, catching sunlight. The droplets cool your face. The field smells fresh for a moment, green and mineral, before the diesel note returns from another machine. Potatoes need water at key stages, especially when tubers are forming. Too little water lowers yield. Too much invites disease. Modern farming is not simply pushing buttons while plants behave. It is constant adjustment, weather watching, market guessing, and financial risk wearing muddy boots. The harvest begins under a lowering sky. A massive harvester moves slowly through the rows, lifting soil and potatoes together. Chains shake earth away. Tubers roll along belts and drop into trailers with deep, steady thuds. The sound is hypnotic engine rumble, metal clatter, soil pouring, potatoes knocking gently against potatoes. Workers watch for stones, damaged tubers, and clods. Dust hangs in the air. The atmosphere is busy, efficient, and oddly soothing. At dusk, trucks leave the field with full loads. Their tyres press dark tracks into the headland. The rows behind them are broken, emptied, quiet. You pick up one missed potato from the soil. It is cool and solid in your palm. no different in feeling from one grown in a cottage plot or mountain terrace. Around it, however, the world has changed completely. The industrial potato feeds millions through systems so large they become almost invisible. It fills freezers, snack aisles, cafeterias, restaurants, and school trays. It supports farmers, truckers, factory workers, breeders, chemists, marketers, and cooks. It also asks difficult questions about what kind of abundance people want, and what costs can be hidden beneath a clean package. The field darkens. Fans hum in the storage sheds. Somewhere, oil is heating for fries. Somewhere else, a family boils potatoes simply, with salt and steam and no branding at all. The humble crop has become a global industrial object, yet when held in the hand, it still feels like earth. Patience and hunger answered quietly. You find yourself high in the Andes again, but not in a scene of conquest, hunger, or machinery. This is a quieter place, alive with colour. Morning light spreads across steep fields, and the air is thin, cold, and bright enough to make every stone edge seem newly drawn. Women and men move through small plots carrying woven sacks, their footsteps soft on dark soil. The smell is clean and earthy, mixed with wood smoke from distant homes and the green scent of leaves warmed by sun. Here, potatoes are not uniform, they are astonishing. A basket is tipped gently onto a cloth, and tubers roll out in purple, red, yellow, cream, rose, blue, and brown. Some are round as eggs. Some are long and curved. Some have skins speckled like bird feathers. Others are knobbly, ridged, or twisted into shapes that seem designed by a mischievous mountain artist working late and refusing supervision. You pick one up and feel its cool weight. Another fits neatly into your palm like a polished stone. Each variety has a name, a use, a preferred altitude, a cooking quality, a story. This diversity is one of the potato's deepest strengths. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this landscape. The Andes remain the great centre of potato diversity. With thousands of cultivated varieties and many wild relatives found across Peru, Bolivia, and neighbouring regions, indigenous farmers have preserved and renewed this diversity through centuries of planting, selection, exchange, and culinary knowledge. Modern scientists value these varieties because they may carry traits useful for disease resistance, climate adaptation, flavour, nutrition, and resilience. You walk beside a farmer who knows the field with a precision no map can match. He points to a slope that catches frost, a hollow where water gathers, a patch where one variety performs well and another sulks like a disappointed guest. He does not speak of biodiversity as an abstract word floating in a conference hall. He speaks of dinner, seed, weather, taste, storage, and children. The vocabulary may be simple, but the knowledge is deep. In the house nearby, potatoes are sorted on blankets. The room is dim and warm, with smoke darkening the rafters and sunlight slipping through a doorway. A kettle murmurs. The air smells of ash, wool, herbs, and raw tubers. Hands move carefully over the piles, separating those for eating from those for seed. Seed potatoes receive special attention. They are not leftovers. They are tomorrow's field, next season's safety, a living inheritance. A quirky tidbit from Andean potato culture is the way some varieties are named with startling imagination. Names may refer to animals, colours, body parts, emotions, local places, or jokes. A tuber might be compared to a cat's paw, a llama nose, a puma print, or something even less polite, because farmers are practical people and not always interested in botanical dignity. These names are memory tools. They help people recognise varieties, pass on knowledge, and keep a little humour in work that can be cold, wet, and exhausting. You follow a path toward a community seed fair. Stalls are arranged with sacks, baskets, and cloths full of potatoes. People trade, admire, argue, laugh, and compare harvests. The sound is bright but gentle voices in local languages and Spanish. Children calling, tubers thudding softly into bags, a radio crackling somewhere nearby. The atmosphere feels festive, yet serious. This is not simply a market. It is a library made of food, and every exchange keeps pages from disappearing. Modern gene banks also enter the story, in research centres. Potato seeds, tissue samples, and tubers are stored, catalogued and studied. You step into a cold storage room where the air is dry and chilled. Lights hum overhead. Shelves hold carefully labelled materials from many regions. The smell is faintly chemical, clean and controlled. Nothing like the smoky warmth of the village house. Scientists preserve genetic resources in case disease, climate change, or social disruption threatens varieties in the field. It is a careful, necessary kind of memory. But gene banks alone cannot keep potato diversity alive in the fullest sense. A tuber in storage is valuable, but a tuber in a farmer's field continues to learn. It faces frost, pests, drought, soil differences, cooking pots, market preferences, and human taste. It remains part of a living system. Conservation is not only freezing samples in a building, it is supporting communities that still plant, name, cook, celebrate, and exchange the crop. Scholars still argue about how best to protect potato diversity. Some emphasise formal conservation through research institutions, breeding programs, and international collections. Others stress farmer-led conservation, land rights, indigenous knowledge, and local seed systems. The disagreement is not just technical. It asks who gets to define value, who benefits from genetic resources, and who is credited for centuries of careful cultivation. The potato may be humble, but questions around it can become very sharp indeed. You move through a field where several varieties grow side by side. Their leaves look similar at first, but differences appear when you slow down. One plant stands taller, another spreads low, one flowers pale violet, another carries white blossoms. The soil is cool beneath your fingers, and when a plant is lifted, tubers appear like hidden beads. The farmer smiles at a good cluster, then frowns at a damaged one. Diversity does not remove risk. It gives more ways to meet risk. Climate makes that more urgent. Frost patterns shift. Rain arrives strangely, or not enough, or all at once with the dramatic timing of an actor who missed rehearsal. New pests and diseases may move into places where they were once rare. High-altitude farmers watch the changes closely, because the mountains are not background scenery to them. They are weather, pasture, water, field, and warning. In the kitchen, several potato varieties are cooked together for tasting. Steam rises from a woven basket. One potato is floury and dry, another waxy and smooth, another nutty, another slightly sweet. Their colours deepen when cut open. Purple flesh, golden flesh, creamy white flesh, all releasing warmth into the cool room. You taste a piece and feel how different it is from the standardised potato of a supermarket bin. This is not one crop. It is a whole chorus, singing softly underground. By late afternoon, clouds gather around the peaks. The fields darken in patches. People tie up sacks and carry selected seed to storage. A dog trots between the houses with great importance and no clear responsibility. Smoke rises blue from chimneys. The air grows colder, and the smell of earth sharpens. You hold a many-eyed purple potato in your palm. It is small, irregular, and beautiful in a stubborn little way. Inside it is ancestry, adaptation, and possibility. Protecting it is not nostalgia, it is preparation. The future of the potato may depend on the varieties that never became famous, the farmers who never wrote books, and the mountain fields where diversity still grows quietly under frost, sun, and watchful hands. You stand in a field under a sky that feels uncertain. The morning is warm, warmer than it should be, and the air carries the dry smell of dust before rain. Potato plants stretch in rows around you. their leaves trembling under a breeze that arrives from nowhere and disappears just as quickly. In the distance, clouds build over the hills, dark at the bottom and bright at the edges, as if the weather itself has not decided what kind of mood it wants today. The potato now faces a changing world. For thousands of years, people have trusted this crop because it can grow where many other foods struggle. It likes cool conditions. It can produce rich calories from modest ground. It can mature quickly in some systems. It can fit into mountains, valleys, gardens, farms, and market fields. But climate change does not politely ask crops what they prefer. Heat waves, irregular rainfall, drought, flooding, new pest patterns, and shifting disease pressures all begin to change the bargain between farmers and soil. You walk slowly between the rows. The leaves brush your hands, slightly rough, a little dry at the edges. The soil has cracked in places, forming thin, dark lines like tired writing. When you kneel and press your fingers into it, the surface is warm, but beneath it there is still a little coolness. Potatoes form it underground, and temperature matters. Too much heat can reduce tuber development, stress the plant, and change yields. Too little water can shrink the harvest. Too much water can invite rot and disease. The potato is resilient, yes, but resilience is not the same as invincibility. That would be asking too much from something that cannot even run away. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this living field. Potatoes are now one of the world's most important food crops, widely grown across many continents and used for food security, animal feed, starch, and processed foods. Their importance makes them central to conversations about future hunger, farming adaptation, and sustainable agriculture. A crop that once moved quietly from mountain soils into global kitchens now stands near the centre of a difficult question. How do people feed a growing population without exhausting the land that feeds them? You enter a research farm where trial plots are marked with small signs. Some rows hold heat-tolerant varieties. Others test resistance to late blight, drought stress, salinity, or pests. The air smells of irrigation water, green leaves, sun-warmed plastic tags, and fertilizer. Scientists and farmers walk together, bending over plants, checking roots, comparing yields. Their conversation is practical: which variety survives, which one cooks well, which one stores, which one farmers can afford, which one families will actually eat. That last part matters. A potato can be scientifically impressive and still fail if it tastes wrong, cooks badly, or does not fit local dishes. People do not live on yield charts, they live on meals. A variety meant for a dry region must not only survive heat, it must enter a pot, a pan, a market basket, a memory. Food security is not simply producing calories, it is producing food that people can grow, reach, trust, cook, and enjoy enough to keep growing. Here is a quirky tidbit from the potato's future-facing world. Researchers have even experimented with growing potatoes in extreme or simulated environments, including projects meant to understand how crops might grow in deserts, salty soils, or controlled systems for space exploration. Yes, the potato has gone from Andean terraces to discussions about Mars-like conditions, which feels like a career path no tuber requested. Still, it makes sense. A crop that stores energy underground, reproduces from pieces, and feeds people efficiently will always attract dreamers with laboratories and very ambitious budgets. You move into a village where farmers gather under a tin roof as rain finally begins. It falls hard, suddenly, drumming on metal so loudly that voices must rise. The smell of dust turns to wet earth in a single breath. Water rushes along the edge of the path. A farmer points toward a field that flooded last season. Another speaks of pests appearing earlier. Someone else says seed has become expensive and fertilizer worse. The potato's future is not only about climate, it is about money, land, roads, storage, markets, and who has the power to recover after a bad year. Historians and agricultural scholars still argue about whether the potato will become even more important in a warming world, or more vulnerable, because many varieties prefer cool conditions. Some emphasize its efficiency, adaptability, and potential in highland and temperate regions. Others warn that heat stress, water scarcity, disease, and dependence on narrow commercial varieties could reduce its reliability. The answer will not be the same everywhere. In some regions, potatoes may expand. In others, farmers may shift crops, seasons, elevations, or methods. The future, inconvenient as ever, refuses to fit neatly into one basket. You follow a farmer into a storage shed where last season's potatoes rest in crates. The air is dim and cool, fans hum softly, the smell is earthy, faintly sweet, and comforting. Good storage reduces waste, which is one of the quietest forms of abundance. A harvest lost after digging is a tragedy without drama, just food slowly disappearing in darkness. Better storage, disease control, transport, and local processing can matter as much as breeding new varieties. Sometimes feeding people begins not with growing more, but with losing less. Soil health also returns as an old lesson wearing modern clothes. Potatoes can be hard on soil when grown too often in the same place, especially under intensive systems. Rotation with grains, legumes, pasture, or cover crops helps reduce disease and rebuild fertility. Organic matter improves water retention. Careful irrigation saves water. Reduced erosion protects fields. These are not glamorous ideas. They do not sparkle like new technology, but soil is where the entire story keeps returning, and soil is not impressed by speeches. You stand beside a smallholder plot where potatoes grow among beans, maize, or other crops. The field is not perfect, but it is alive with diversity. Insects move through flowers at the margins. A rooster announces something of no global importance. Children pass carrying water. The atmosphere is warm, busy, and grounded. For many families, potatoes remain both food and income. A good harvest can pay school fees, buy medicine, repair a roof, or fill a lean season. A bad harvest can tighten every choice. The potato's future will depend on many hands: indigenous farmers preserving old varieties, breeders developing resilient ones, governments supporting fair systems, cooks keeping demand alive, and consumers remembering that cheap food is never truly cheap if soil, water, and labour are damaged along the way. It will depend on whether the world values diversity before disaster makes diversity suddenly fashionable again. Evening comes after the rain. The field shines. Droplets cling to potato leaves, catching the last light like small glass beads. The soil smells renewed, though the cracks have not fully vanished. You lift one plant gently at the edge of the row and see small tubers forming beneath, pale and tender, not ready yet. They are future food, unfinished and vulnerable. You place the soil back carefully. There is something calming in the gesture. The potato has survived empire, famine, science, industry, and war. But tomorrow's survival will require humility. Not the potato's humility, which it has in abundance, but ours. People will need to listen to fields, protect variety, waste less, and treat the soil as something living rather than an endless machine. The clouds drift apart. A cooler wind moves over the rows. Beneath your feet, the crop continues its quiet work in darkness, growing where it can, waiting for care, carrying both warning and promise in the same small hidden body. You sit in the quiet corner of a kitchen as evening settles over the world, and the potato rests on the table in front of you. It is not polished. It is not rare. It does not glow like gold, sparkle like spice, or perfume the room like fruit. Its skin is dusty and uneven. Its shape is slightly awkward, as if it was designed in a hurry by the earth and then gently forgotten. Yet when you hold it in your palm, it feels heavy with more than starch. It feels heavy with human history. The potato has always worked from below. While kings argued, ships sailed, armies marched, factories smoked, and scientists bent over microscopes, the tuber continued swelling in darkness. It did not ask to become a world crop. It did not ask to feed empires, rescue peasants, support migrations, enter snack aisles, or appear in his school lunches beside suspiciously cheerful peas. It simply answered one of humanity's oldest questions: what can grow here, and will it be enough? You turn it slowly in your hand. The skin feels cool, faintly rough, and dry against your fingers. A few shallow eyes mark its surface. They are small, but they hold the possibility of new plants. That is the quiet trick at the centre of its power. A potato is food, but it is also future food. It can be eaten, or it can be planted. Few objects on a kitchen table carry that choice so plainly. A mainstream historical fact belongs in this still room: the potato is now one of the world's most important staple crops. Grown across continents and woven into diets, economies, and farming systems from highland villages to industrial food chains. Its global rise changed population patterns, supported urban life, influenced war and migration, and reshaped everyday cooking in countless homes. For something that spends its life underground, it has been remarkably involved in surface events. You move through a series of kitchens in your imagination. In one, potatoes boil in a blackened pot over a peat fire. In another, they roast beneath coals in a mountain home. In another, they fry in oil at a city stall, sizzling loudly enough to wake even the sleepiest appetite. In another, they are mashed with butter, stirred into soup, folded into dumplings, cooked with spices, shredded into a hot pan, or sliced thin into chips. Each kitchen gives the potato a new accent. The smell changes too. Sometimes it is smoky and earthy, sometimes buttery and warm, sometimes sharp with vinegar, rich with garlic, bright with chili, or salty from the sea air near a fish shop. The sound may be a knife against a board, oil crackling, water bubbling, a spoon mashing softly against the side of a bowl. The touch may be steam on your face, soil under your nails, rough burlap against your shoulder, or the soft breaking of a cooked tuber beneath a fork. Here is a quirky final tidbit for this humble crop. Potatoes have become so ordinary that people often forget they were once exotic, feared, promoted by rulers, studied by scientists, and carried through crises. They sit in pantry bins looking deeply unbothered, while having helped shape modern population growth, famine memory, fast food habits, and global agriculture. If vegetables could have smug expressions, the potato would be entitled to one. Thankfully, it mostly just looks confused. That ordinariness is important. Many world-changing things do not announce themselves as world-changing. They arrive as chores. They require peeling. They leave dirt in the sink. They appear so often that people stop noticing them. Yet civilization depends on such unnoticed companions. Bread, rice, maize, beans, salt, water, firewood, milk, potatoes. The foundations of history are rarely as dramatic as history books suggest. They are often edible, repetitive, and carried in baskets. The potato story is also a warning. Dependence can nourish, and dependence can endanger. A crop that saves lives in one generation may expose vulnerability in another if poverty, inequality, disease, or narrow planting choices close every other path. Diversity matters, access matters, soil matters, memory matters. The potato teaches that food security is not just abundance. It is resilience, fairness, and the right to eat when harvests fail. Scholars still argue over how to weigh the potato's influence compared with other forces: empire, industry, trade, medicine, migration, war, and science. Some see it as one of the great engines of modern population growth. Others caution that no single crop explains civilization's path. The wisest answer may be the gentlest one. The potato did not change the world alone. It changed the world by entering millions of ordinary decisions: what to plant, what to cook, what to store, what to sell, what to carry, what to feed a child at night. You look again at the potato on the table. It is humble, but not small. It carries mountain frost, indigenous knowledge, colonial movement, peasant survival, famine grief, laboratory patience, factory heat, wartime gardens, genetic diversity, climate uncertainty, and the warm comfort of dinner. All of that, hidden inside a plain brown shape that asks only for soil, time, and a little respect. Outside, the night deepens. The kitchen window reflects the room in soft darkness. A pot begins to simmer on the stove. The potato slips into water, and soon the air fills with that familiar earthy scent. It is not grand. It is better than grand. It is useful. It is warm. It is enough. And now the long road of this quiet crop begins to soften into silence. You let the images drift more slowly, terraces under stars, rain on Irish fields, market baskets glowing with purple and gold tubers, a wartime garden under a dimmed sky, a modern field shining after rain. Each scene grows gentler, farther away, as if wrapped in mist. The potato returns to the soil in your mind, resting beneath cool earth, safe from noise, safe from hurry. The room around you grows calm. The pot murmurs softly. Steam rises and fades. You breathe in, breathe out, and let the whole human story settle, like a warm blanket over the dark ground.